Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Reno City Planning Commission meeting on Wednesday, November 1st, 2017. Would like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could lead that by Commissioner Marshall, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I catch you mid-bite. Sorry about that. Okay, Michelle, could we have roll call, please?
Okay, Britton Griffith Douglas,
Present.
Ed Hawkins,
Here.
Paula Levis,
Here.
John Marshall,
Here.
Kevin Weisky,
Here.
Peter Gower is absent, Mark Johnson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda is public comment. This item is for either public comment on any action item or for any general public comment. I do have a couple of requests to speak under this item. If anybody has not filled one of these out and would like to speak, please see Michelle over at the desk. The first one I have is from Tammy Holtstill.
Good evening. Tammy Hiltstill, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee. The water is still in Swan Lake and out of its rims, and I'm still here. Those you see right there, that is in the corner of Lear and Stead Boulevard, which is either for sewer or storm drain. It's an awful lot that is going to be heading straight to Swan Lake, a lake which is still not capable of handling what the city of Reno Stead Sewer Plant is pumping. It is full, and it is going to stay full at this point. As you see here, this shows you have two new warehouses going in, and there's the demand of the amount of affluent water that is generated for warehousing and the offices. Then you add in apartments that are at the front of Military Road and homes on Military Road. And on the government website, it shows that one bedroom is 120 gallons of water minimum per day. That is a lot of affluent water that is going to go to the Stead Sewer Plant, which is going to go directly into Swan Lake, a lake which is not prepared to receive the amount of water you want to put in there. You are flooding out residents. Your backyard is messing up our front yard, and you're damaging our properties. It's time to stop. It's time to fix the situation. It's time to take control over your affluent water and put it someplace else. It's time to put a moratorium on the stress that you're giving that until you can fix the situation. Not one of those new apartments or new buildings should be running until the time that you have your affluent water under control. That lake cannot do it. We cannot accept it, and we will not accept it. It's time for a moratorium. It's time to stop and plan properly what you are doing. You're putting the city of Reno in Washoe County, post-stamping it, which is against NRS. You guys don't have any of the infrastructure in place for any of that kind of thing, and it needs to stop. You need to pay attention to what's going on around you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Next request to speak form I have is from Danny Cleus.
Danny Cleus for the record. You know, even though I don't stay here for the whole meetings, I watch it on YouTube. Last time, you guys made some changes to the master plan, which is a good thing, but you're still giving developers too much credit. We all know their statistics aren't right. They don't do the whole studies. They just do a little parcel for theirs. It's time for the city of Reno's planning to get their own study done. That way you can compare it to whatever the developer is putting up there. For infrastructure, the police, the fire department, you're already behind. What you guys are building isn't going to make up for what you're already behind. That's just going to add to what you're behind. I talked to a lieutenant just the other week about the police situation. They're 43 behind right now. You adding in all these homes, subdivisions, everything everywhere, just like Stonegate, they estimate they need 20 officers for Stonegate. That's 63 behind. Stonegate's their taxes aren't going to cover for 63 officers. Neither are these warehouses, neither are all these other subdivisions, and that's just for Stonegate. I wish you guys would do more. Get the studies done. That way you can compare to what the developers want to do. Again, the sewers, nah, we're not having that anymore. I got it, another year I got to worry about it. Another year, my home will get more destroyed. Flood insurance doesn't pay for what we need. Done. Because they say it's not a water problem, even though the water sat there for 6 goddamn months. It's an earth movement problem. How fair is that? Why should we have flood insurance if it's not going to pay out for what the water does to our properties? Really tired. Responsible building. Get the studies done. That way you can compare, because we all know the developer studies don't go past their properties. Our highways are full, and you're just adding more to it without getting anything fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Does anyone else wish to speak under this public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. I will bring it back to the commission. Item number 4, approval of minutes. Looking for a motion on the Reno City Planning Commission meeting from October 4th.
Make that motion, Chair. Chair.
Okay. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No recusals, okay,
I have to abstain. I was not present.
okay. Abstention for Commissioner Marshall. And then we also have Planning Commission minutes from October 18th. Looking for a motion on that as well.
Move approval.
Commissioner Marshall. Have a second?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Item number 5, City Council Liaison Reports. Do not see Commission.
I have nothing from
Councilwoman?
Councilwoman Breckus today.
Okay. We will move on to public hearings. I'm sorry.
Could you report on, they heard an appeal, or are you going to do that at another point? Report on city council action?
I cover that under
Got
council
it.
actions.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our public hearings. We'll start with item 6.1, case number LDC 18-00022, the 440 Ridge Street zone change.
Good evening, Planning Commission. This is Jeff Borkhardt, Associate Planner for the record. This particular case is an initiation, it was initiated by the City Council for a zone change to add the historic landmark overlay designation onto the property that's hatched out here, which is located between Arlington, Clay Ridge, and California near here, and then just as a landmark that most people know is the Brewer's Cabinet on the corner right there. So this structure was originally constructed in 1922, and it was constructed as an apartment building. And in 1984, it was converted over to offices. And so what the applicant would like to do is convert it back to an apartment building, but apartments are not allowed within the professional office zone. And so As part of the benefits that are offered with the historic landmark overlay, the applicant could actually, the property owner could actually apply for alternative uses that are not normally allowed in the underlying zone if they contribute to the historic nature of the property and are consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. And so the Historical Resources Commission recommended the nomination to the City Council on August 17th, 2017. The City Council accepted that nomination and listed the property on the local register on September 27th, and then they initiated the zone change, which is the last step in the process. And so there were no NAB comments as part of this. And with that said, here's a picture of what the structure looks like. It's historic under a number of different criteria on our local register, one of which is it's in the Newlands National Register Historic District. And so with that, staff can make all the findings and recommends approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I will, I guess, start with public comment. Do we have any requests to speak on this, Michelle? We do not?
No, we
Do we
do
need
not.
to do disclosures for this? Okay, so we'll do disclosures. We'll start with Commissioner Weisky.
I'm visited the site.
I visited the site.
Commissioner Griffith, I visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson, as did I.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site.
Okay. So, there's no public comment on this item. I'll bring it back to the commission for any questions, staff, or comments, or a motion. Any one of the above.
Sorry, I missed public comment there.
No public comment.
I can make a motion. Based on compliance with the applicable findings, I move to recommend that City Council approve the zoning map amendment by ordinance for case number LDC 18-00022. Is that adequate?
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second to that?
Commissioner Hawkins, second.
Okay. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 6.2, case number LDC 18-00018, Un Cafe Italian Bistro. A presentation from the applicant, please.
My name is Andrew Ganoso. I'm speaking on behalf of Cherie Rhodes, the owner of Un Cafe. I am presenting tonight a special use permit presentation on the dining room beer and wine license for our restaurant. As a little bit of background, Un Cafe submitted an application for a beer and wine license for the new bistro. And we were advised by the planning organization that a special use permit would be required because the proposed location in Lakeside Crossing is zoned as neighborhood commercial. Existing loaning, as I just said, is neighborhood commercial. The master plan calls for urban residential / commercial. This is a location of of Lakeside Crossing. Let me see if I can do that differently. Across the top of the aerial photograph is Moana Lane. To the right is Warren Way, and a portion of Lakeside Crossing is shown in the photograph. The location of Un Cafe Italian Bistro is on the right portion, about 1/3 of that rectangle on the right. The facility is 1,250 square feet. The interior seating will be 38. We estimate that based on our table placement. We don't expect any environmental impacts. There's no additional exterior lighting that will be required or installed. and the exterior signage will be consistent with the Lakeside Crossing Association criteria. The hours of operation will be closed on Monday. Tuesday through Friday, we'll be serving breakfast and lunch from 7 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Phase 2 will be Saturday and Sunday brunch from 10:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then Phase 3 will open for dinner service on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday evenings from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Current status, the build-out is currently in progress. We estimate the completion of that work by November 20th, and we expect to be fully operational on December 1st. There was a Community Development Department condition, and we concur with that, and we will place a sign at the front entrance that stipulates that no alcoholic beverages will be taken beyond this point. And that concludes my presentation this evening.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from staff and then call you back if we have any questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good evening, Commissioners. Kyle Chisholm, Assistant Planner for the record. The applicant did a really good job overviewing the project. I have a couple displays here that I'd like to show you. This is the entire center, Lakeside Crossing, as the applicant's representative mentioned. The portion, the site that we're speaking of would be this building here. The site was originally built in 1988 and entitled and included all the design aspects such as landscaping, site access and circulation, parking, and so on and so forth. And what we have here tonight is, as the applicant's representative stated, a special use permit to establish a restaurant with alcohol, which it requires a special use permit in the neighborhood commercial zone. The site, since this point, was split up into 10 different parcels. So the subject site is what I just pointed out, that building only. But a couple key components, as was discussed in the staff report, is that the common area and parking area is all part of the Lakeside Association, or Lakeside Crossing Association, and is maintained as such. So they have CC&Rs that regulate the landscaping, the access and circulation, and maintain that those components for all the tenants and individual property owners of the site. That being said, the nearest residential property is located about 250 feet to the south and southwest, or southeast, excuse me. And the building is actually oriented towards the north and east, so the building's facing away from the residentially zoned property, so it's situated, I guess you could say, good for this type of use. And so with that being said, the project was presented at the Ward 2 NAB on October 17th, and comments received were in general support of the project. No other calls or emails were received by staff, and staff can make all the applicable findings, and with the recommended conditions, recommend approval of the project. And if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kyle. I will bring this one to the commission for disclosures, and then we'll open it for public comment. Start with Commissioner Olivas.
I visited the site.
None.
Commissioner Johnson, no disclosures?
Commissioner Griffith, I am familiar with the site, and I saw their presentation at the Ward 2 Neighborhood Advisory Board.
Commissioner Hawkins, familiar with the site?
Commissioner Weisky, I visited the site.
Okay, as again, this is a public presentation, I'll open it up for public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak for him on this?
No, we do not.
Okay. Seeing nobody rushing the podium, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for any questions. Commissioner Marshall.
Claudia, why do we, I mean, is this for upgrade for beer and wine? I mean,
Yes.
why are we hearing this?
Claudia Hanson, Planning Manager.
I mean, can we not hear these
In the neighborhood commercial zone, which is typically the commercial zone that's located within a neighborhood, hence its name. So to allow alcohol service
Yep.
in the NC zone, it needs to go through the special use permit process.
I guess I should have rephrased. I realized that, but the question is, we just adopted a new master plan. Is it possible that
So the
we
master
say
plan
for
is,
beer and wine, or can we do, can we get to the code amendment, or when we do code that?
that would be a code amendment.
Okay,
So
thank
master
you.
plan is policy and guidance. Code amendment would be the specific requirements for special use permits.
Okay, I'm ready to make a motion when you're ready to hear one.
Okay, we'll see if there's additional questions or comments first. Anyone else? Seeing none, I guess I will turn it back to you, Commissioner Marshall.
In the case of LDC 18-00018, I move based on the compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit subject to conditions.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Hawkins, second.
Commissioner Hawkins, I have a motion, second. Any additional comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good luck with your project. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, case number LDC 18-00017, the Moraine Apartments. I have a presentation from the applicant.
You just put it on. No, we have one.
Oh. Click the button.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Carl Matzel. I'm here tonight with Tony Salcal, the owner. This project is a special use permit for a 20-unit apartment complex. The property is located north of the intersection of McCarran and North Virginia, directly north of the ball fields, and is approximately 1.89 acres. To the north is an existing apartment complex. To the south is Rancho San Rafael ball fields. West is vacant. And to the east is North Virginia. The property's master plan, urban residential. The property is zoned arterial commercial, and our arterial commercial permits multifamily as an allowed use. The application is for a site plan, the application is for a special use permit for cuts and fills in excess of 10 feet in a hillside development. There are 2 3-story units consisting of 10 units apiece. The units vary from 2 to 3 bedrooms. A manager's unit will be incorporated into the apartment, one of the apartments. The required landscaping is 15%. The proposed landscaping is 50.4%. Parking spaces, 42 required. The project has 43. The building covers approximately 10,800 square feet for about 13% of the site. Driveways and walks cover about 30,000 square feet for about 36.5%. The site is in a hillside development with 50% of the site exceeding 15%. This development has complied with the open space requirement and the adaptive hillside architecture with split foundations. Ooh. The architecture complies with 1812.03 articulation requirements. We've incorporated both horizontal and vertical articulation with a variety of materials and colors. The project will contribute about 140 trips per day, 11 a.m. peak hour and 13 p.m. peak hour trips, well below the threshold for a capacity analysis. That's it.
Okay. We'll call you back if we have any questions.
Thank you.
The presentation from staff. Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Jeff Borkart, Associate Planner for the record. So Carl did a good job doing an overview of the project. So I just wanted to highlight a couple particular conditions that are of interest. Michelle, if we could switch it over to the camera, please. Oh, wow, that was quick. There's a couple conditions with regards to landscaping. There is a condition regarding placing evergreen trees in this location here, and then placing evergreen trees in a specific quantity along the eastern boundary. And that is to provide a softening of the project from the surrounding. There are also conditions with regards to signs. This is within the arterial commercial zone, which allows for large signs. But given the project's residential use and the surrounding residential uses, staff believed it was more appropriate for signs that were in scale with the residential. So there's a condition that requires them to follow residential sign standards within the code. Because of the hillside ordinance and the various different grading that's happening on the site, condition number 10 addresses the fact that 3-to-1 slopes are desired throughout the site. And that's because they're able to be planted easier and revegetated, which has a much better visual impact and a softer impact to the surrounding site. And then condition number 12 discusses providing large shrubs on the landscape bench right in this area. And it's also important to note that this landscape plan doesn't necessarily show it, but there's actually, well, it's a little difficult to see. There's connectivity to the adjacent park right here. There's also a condition for the applicant to work with the school district to provide a safe routes to school analysis to demonstrate that students have the ability to get to surrounding schools. Now, some of the schools are, well, most of the schools are fairly far away from this particular site, but they can be accessed actually through walking through the park and under the tunnel through Rancho San Rafael into the Kings Row area, which is where most of the schools are. So with all of those conditions, all the code requirements will be met. One neighborhood advisory board member had concerns with traffic, and particularly with the intersection of Moraine and North Virginia and the ability to turn left out of the site. At this time, the traffic does not increase the overall level of service to trigger the need for a traffic signal as part of this project. So with that being said, staff can make all the findings and we recommend for approval. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Bring it back to the commission for disclosures. Start with Commissioner Weisky.
Commissioner Weisky, I visited the site.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Griffith visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson, as did I.
Commissioner Marshall, no disclosures.
Commissioner Olivas visited the site.
Okay. So again, this is a public presentation. I will open it up for public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak on this item?
No, we do not.
Is anyone in the audience wishing to speak on this particular agenda item? Okay. With that, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for any questions. Commissioners? No?
I have
Commissioner
a
Marshall?
question.
Okay.
Can we talk about special condition 18, please? And Jeff, just probably because I'm relatively new, I'd kind of like to see the transit requirements that RTC specifies rather than getting, conditioning it on a subsequent written response. Can you walk me through what those might be, or where's the nearest transit for a multifamily?
Actually, I had a conversation about this with the applicant this morning. He can come up real quick and tell you exactly where the transit location is. They've recently done some improvements in that area, and he had a conversation with Ms. Wu at RTC, and she provided some feedback in terms of where that transit is located. So Carl,
Okay.
if you want to come up.
As Jeff said, him and I had a discussion about this condition 18. I did send some material over to RTC, and if you, can I have the pictures? RTC doesn't have any recommendation or comments on this at all because they just, I probably won't be able to get it, but they just did.
Here, Carl, you can use the mouse right here.
Oh, okay. They just did improvements right on the intersection of Moraine and South Virginia. They put in a flashing crossing light and 2 bus stops. So there's no, RTC doesn't have any comments to this condition. I sent the letter off to Jeff today.
So in terms of sidewalks and pedestrian
access
to the bus stops?
all right through here on a dedicated right-of-way with 5-foot walks that we connect into.
Thank you. So in other words, condition 18, there's nothing going to be required as a result of condition 18.
Correct. Except for me supplying the information from RTC that I've already given Jeff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioners, additional questions? I just have one quick one, Jeff, just to clarify for myself. The reason that we're seeing this is due specifically to the cuts and fills in the hillside development. What they're proposing is an allowable use and less than what is actually possible in terms of the development of the site with respect to the number of units that are proposed. They're actually under that amount, and we're basically seeing this because of the hillside development issue. Is that correct?
Yeah, partially. It's not, the use would normally be allowed with a site plan review, which would not come before the planning commission. Because of the grade and the grading proposed, those are what triggered the special use permit. The applicants elected to bring that site plan review up to the special use permit level to run concurrently, which helps them speed the process up a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted that clarification.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
I had one.
Commissioner Marshall.
Jeff, or I don't know, maybe this is for Claudia, but I seem to recall there was some new policies or adjustment in policies in the master plan for rockery walls. Am I imagining things, or it just have we looked at whether or not it's consistent with the new direction from in the master plan, or am I completely off base here?
Janelle Thomas, Senior
For
Civil
retaining
Engineer for the
walls.
record. I'm not aware that there are any specific changes to our rockery wall standards. We do have a policy on rockery walls that we adhere to currently. I'm not aware of any upcoming changes on those.
Thank you.
Okay, no additional questions. Any comments? Motion?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Weisky, in the case of LDC 18-00017 Moraine Apartments, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit, subject to conditions, and I can make all of the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll second, and I can make all the findings.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Good luck with your project. Okay, the next item on the agenda, item 6.4, case number LDC 18-00013, Mountain Gate 78. Start with a presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, Chris Baker with Manhart Consulting here on behalf of Ryder Homes. Before you is Mountain Gate 78, a tentative map and special use permit application request. The project is located at the southwest corner of Arrow Creek and Wedge Parkway. I think it's important to bring up that the whole site's a little over 41 acres. We're actually only developing about 50% of it, which is the southernmost portion south of the Whites Creek drainage. The existing master plan zoning designations, again, these are not changing. special planning area, and SPD, WDDP, which is the Wedge Duraskar specific plan that was originally approved in the county, and upon annexation was adopted into Reno Municipal Code and their master plan. So what that was is they set forth allowable residential units in these areas, and then there were some commercial components. So what's left for this property is the remaining 78 units that are proposed and up to 8 acres of commercial. I think it is important to bring up that currently there's an existing tentative map for 78 units approved on the site. It was approved in 2014, and this does have quite a little bit of history. Originally in 2004, with the Mountain Gate Phase 1 tentative map, the same 78 units were approved on the site. That map was modified in 2008 and then expired and then was reapplied for in 2014. So those same residential units, the same residential density that we're proposing now has been there since 2004. Again, tentative map requests for 78 single-family residential units on plus or minus 37 acres of the 41 plus or minus acre project site. The reason we're before you is we're introducing a commercial component to this, more specifically a neighborhood commercial component, which is a little under 4 acres, so 3.87 acres. There are a couple special use permit triggers with that. The first is disturbance of a major drainage way to allow for minor grading for the commercial development and the residential component. And then also, there's actually residential adjacency added now. That wasn't required before because there was no commercial component, but we're actually implying that upon ourselves, considering we are introducing that neighborhood commercial component. Here's kind of the site and landscape plans. So they're kind of broke down into a few different things. This is the commercial component, which again is going to be northeast, adjacent from the current under construction apartments. It is, again, a little over 3.87 acres. Here's the residential landscape plan. Again, including 78 residential lots. The overall density is a little over 2 units to the acre. Lot sizes range just from under 7,000 square feet to a little over 13,500 square feet, with an average of just under 8,000 square feet. The commercial component is proposing to have about 35,000 square feet of neighborhood commercial uses. Again, those are not known as of yet, but we're proposing similar type uses to neighborhood commercial uses in Title 18. Again, common area and open space, we're only developing about half the site. So a little over 19 acres is going to remain open space. Important to point out, through the process, back in 2004 and in 2008 and subsequently in 2014, the buffer area here in between the county parcels and the city of Reno parcels, we haven't modified that. So we're staying consistent with the 25-foot landscape buffer. And then also that buffer wraps around here to the front. Here's some conceptual elevations. The goal here is to be consistent with the existing Mountain Gate, Phase 1, which is to the north. Like that, these are going to be private streets. This is going to be a gated community. The current proposal and the approved tentative map does not include a gated facility, so that is one change. As part of the special use permit requirements, we have proposed commercial elevations. They're going to be of the farmhouse nature, so if you go back, the residential elevations, if you're familiar with the Mountain Gate product, there's some Spanish, there's some farmhouse and some cottage. They've chose to perpetuate the farmhouse elevations in the commercial. Here's the rest of them. And again, getting back to that open space, it's kind of, this is tough because this is zoomed in on only half the site. So I think it's important to bring up that, again, there's this 19 acres over here that we're not touching. It equates to about 47% of the site. Again, I want to reiterate the buffer that was in place with the prior approvals, and we're continuing to include that in the project. As part of previous approvals, there's also a trail requirement in the drainage way. We're keeping that. There's 3 connections, actually, one out here on White's, one kind of midway point in the development, and then actually having that tie into the commercial component also. Again, the special use permit trigger for disturbance of a major drainage way, we are staying out of the flood portion. We have that 15-foot setback requirement. We do have some minor grading into it, and then again, just the addition of the pathway that was on the previous approvals. This did go to the Ward 2 NAB. There were a few concerns, mainly regarding traffic, to be honest. Most of the previous approvals, the concerns were regarding traffic. And in those stages, the concerns were regarding the installation of a light at Arrow Creek and Wedge. As most of you know, that light's actually now in place. So with the addition of the commercial component, the level of service standards are currently exceed City of Reno standards, and they're going to continue to maintain that. Also, the buffer lots discussion was talked about, and we reiterated that we're keeping the landscape buffer and we're doing the edge matching as the current approval proposed. And there was also some discussion about pedestrian connectivity. There's 2 crosswalks now. There's one at Arrow Creek and Wedge, and there's one at Whites Creek. And we've been in discussions with the City of Reno to ensure safe pedestrian connectivity. You know, again, the whole purpose of introducing the neighborhood commercial component is kind of the shift in the area. There is now a lot of multifamily that wasn't there in 2004 or even in 2014, to be honest. So we feel that having a walkable commercial center kind of in that area would be beneficial to the community. So with that, I'm available for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Call you back if any questions come up. We'll have a presentation from staff. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you and good evening. For the record, Nathan Gilbert, Associate Planner. Chris did a great job providing an overview of the proposed request. Essentially, the proposed modification to the existing approved tentative map for 78 units on the site would reduce the average lot size by about 2,200 square feet in order to accommodate the 3.9 acre neighborhood commercial component. The overall footprint is the same. I think this graphic gives a little better representation of the open space. 47% of the lot itself remains open space, will be deed restricted as open space, and that's consistent with the previous approval. The footprint of the overall project is very consistent with the previous entitlement. The special use permit for disturbance of a major drainage way is very minimal and maintains consistency with the previous approval for that. Again, some of the comments we received from the NAB and some general inquiries from citizens calling were related to traffic concerns. Staff did request a full traffic analysis provided by Paul Seleghi, who was here this evening, should the Planning Commission have any questions. As Chris mentioned, the existing conditions, including the apartments and all surrounding development, were analyzed with the existing plus. With this proposed projects, and all levels of service or at key intersections are maintained. Staff did provide a memo with some clarifying language for 2 conditions, just minor changes. If the Planning Commission were to recommend approval, staff would recommend those semantic changes. As conditions, staff can make all the applicable findings and recommend approval. We're available for any questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. So this is a public hearing, and I do have several requests to speak. I will, however, start with disclosures from the commission. Start with Commissioner Weisky.
Commissioner Weisky, I've ridden out to the site.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site, talked with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Griffith, I saw the presentation at the ward, or the NAB Ward 2.
Commissioner Johnson, I spoke with the applicant's representative and familiar with the site.
Commissioner Marshall, I've ridden by the site.
Commissioner Olivas, I drove by the site.
Okay, with that, I will open public comment, and I will start in order. First with Susan Callahan, followed by Jim E. Come to the podium and announce your name, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Susan Hers Callahan, and I live in the Pine Tree Ranch subdivision, which is just to the south of White Creek Lane. In 2014, there was an initial meeting on zoning and density, excuse me, for this third phase of Mountain Gate. Our development had people come, and we requested single-story houses to be built, no ingress or egress on White Creek Lane, to retain the original number of houses that were to be developed, to allow the drainage ditch to remain, and voiced concerns over the traffic congestion and the air quality. Every point we made was dismissed by the project manager for Mountain Gate. And unfortunately, your board sided with the developer and granted him everything he asked for. We are 3 years later, we're still concerned about those particular issues. And of course, one of the most crucial being that of water. Yes, we had a record-breaking winter last year, but it was preceded by 7 years of drought, which easily could be happening again. Please consider decreasing the number of homes in this project and require them to be single-story. Our development adjacent to it is all single-story houses with only one two-story house. Our lot sizes along White Creek Lane are 12,000 square feet minimum. We request that the houses along White Creek Lane in the Mountain Gate development be that size as well. In the cottonwood trees that remain along the drainage ditch, a red-tailed hawk nest has been an active nest for years. Those trees need to be left alone to ensure survival of those majestic animals. After that first council meeting, I swore I'd never attend another meeting because it was a useless endeavor. You, the board, have already decided in favor of the developer, and the public input means nothing to you. But when my 7-year-old grandson and I were walking along Whites Creek Lane, which of course we won't be able to do any longer once this development happens, he asked about the big yellow signs. I explained a bit about the process, and he said, "Nana, don't let him take our field. It is for his sake that I'm here at all for this farce." My last question to you is this: do you have the right to negatively impact hundreds of lives for the sake of the almighty dollar, which of course is what this all comes down to? Thank you.
Okay, my next request to speak form is from Jim E., followed by Jeff Zupon.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Endries. I'm not a resident of this community immediately to the west of there, but I am a member of the community of Whites Creek, Sunrise or Whites Creek generally, but we live at River Oaks. We are here tonight because, like the applicant did indicate, there's a lot of history behind this, and I think you've seen that and heard this just from the previous member of the public. The history that I have reviewed in just the short few days that the staff report has come out, and I tried to put them in context with what our issues are, and you'll hear more about our issues as it impacts the residents of Sunrise or Wrights Creek to the west of this project. But if you look at the map or the picture on the wall here, we have an issue that we need to resolve tonight. In terms of history, there was a lot of discussion from members in our community to the west about how you're going to deal with the increase in traffic proceeding westerly on Whites Creek, and they come to private community. Sunrise at Whites Creek is a private community. It's not a gated community yet, but it probably will have to become one, larger because of this. Our community has expected this project to emerge at some point in the future, and the future seems to be at our doorstep. So before going forward with this, there's a tremendous public safety, traffic issue, as well as private property issues relative to What is the disposition of that location at the end of Whites Creek where their project comes to an end and their trail for their Whites Creek DG trail commences? It's important because I don't even think that I saw in staff's report any discussion at all about that small turnaround, and that was a matter of topic. It was in the record in 2008 and 2014. There is not one mention of that turnaround and the importance of that turnaround or a roundabout at the end of the development. Before the project moves forward, we need to have a resolution of the impact of that development coming to the end of Whites Creek and how it will impact the community of Sunrise at Whites Creek and the adjacent community in terms of all the traffic that will be turning around, including and not limited to fire trucks or any other emergency vehicle that may need space to turn around at the end of that Whites Creek turnabout. So I hope we talk about that tonight, or at least pull the parties back together, because that is going to be an issue at some point in the very near future. With that, I'll yield my 19 minutes and just indicate that the Dodgers are still behind 5-0.
Thank you for that update. Jeff Zupon, followed by Maureen Zupon.
Good evening, Commission. I'm Jeff Zupon. I live in Whites Creek. Was the first house. We built our house in 2007. We moved in 2008. We knew Mr. Duraskar. He was our neighbor. It was just the two of us when we were building the house, and we discussed what was going to happen within this property here. We came to the 2008 meeting and discussed with the Ryder folks that little turnaround that you see there. It's kind of partially. It looks like based on some of the property, if you look at some of the old maps, there was a home there, and now it's more of a open space with a turnaround. Mr. Duraskar and I and Ryder and my wife discussed with them, and they agreed to give space up for the turnaround, which you will see in the minutes from the 2008 meeting we had, and it was also discussed again in 2014. Now, we had an issue. First of all, I'd like to say I agree with just about everything Ms. Callahan said, because I'm pretty disappointed with some of the planning that's gone on here. In fact, back in 2008, there was no mention of all the apartments that were going to go in. It was supposed to be a commercial space. And when they decided to go from 30 homes here, or 32 or whatever it was, to 78, we were discussing traffic and how dangerous it is down there with the baseball fields and the soccer fields and the library. And now there's discussion of an ice rink going in there with additional traffic. I don't know if any of you have been down there between like 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 and 6 at night. Actually, it's almost all day. If you go down Arrow Creek towards 395 and try to get onto 395, the traffic backs all the way up to the Zalesi side of Virginia Street, Zalesi and Arrow Creek. I don't know which one you want to call that street, but the traffic situation is insane. The commission said they did a traffic study, and there was plenty of, there wasn't enough vehicles to even justify the light. They were going to put a turnaround there. Then all of a sudden they approved the apartments, the light went in, and now we're still sitting with 78 versus 32 homes in this property area, which is 100 to 150 additional vehicles coming out, and either on the Whites Creek turnaround, making a right turn up to Arrow Creek to get onto Arrow Creek in order to even get onto Arrow Creek, because why would they want to go down to Wedge Parkway, make a left, and then have to deal with the light up there, which is already kind of insane as it is right now. So the roundabout is the main reason why I'm here. Obviously, traffic is a problem too. People walking in the area on Whites Creek is an issue, trying to get to the ball fields, because every Saturday and Sunday during the summer months, cars back up and park on Whites Creek, becoming a major traffic issue on both sides right now. Once they put in this development and they can't park on one side versus the other, it's going to become even worse. They'll probably back all the way up to that roundabout. Signage is one other thing. I mean, is there going to be signage coming out of the Whites Creek sign saying no right turn, left turn only, something along that line to prevent them from coming in and damaging our property? Because the additional vehicles coming through our private road, which wasn't wide enough for the county to take possession of it, was one of the reasons why we had an issue with it, because we're paying to upgrade that road every 3 years. Now we're doing it every 5 because the association, we're going to have to increase the fees on our property and additionally have to deal with the additional traffic coming through our private area.
Thank you. Next, I have Maureen Zupon, followed by Tam Ngo.
Good evening, everyone. Like my husband did announce, we have been here a few times. We were here several years ago when Mountain Gate was going to be jumping the road with 33 half-acre homes, and it was in the depth of the recession, which it makes sense. Let's double it and double down and, make more money off of that. So it turned into 78 homes. And we came here, we discussed how everyone walks, like Ms. Callahan said, up and down the street. There's no sidewalk use at all. And we had discussed the trees and the sidewalks and the parking from the baseball and the soccer and how they were gonna handle that. As you can see, the exit for this Mountain Gate development is all the way up to our private road, which my husband discussed as we pave that, we pay for it. And a correction to his statement was it was supposed to be every 5 years for $17,000 that comes out of the 14 homes that are in this development. And now it's gone to 3 because of all the people who cut through from Arrow Creek to go to the baseball fields, the soccer fields, Rayleigh's, and all the additional people who are going to be doing the exact same thing because they live there or they're trying to get to Starbucks. In that third of a mile from Arrow Creek to Whites Creek, it is insanity with 1,500 apartments. I don't know why they didn't eminent domain streets down to South Virginia, but 2 more ice rinks, which operate at all hours of the day. People play hockey at midnight, and it's insane that all of this is going to be in a third of a mile section. So what I'm here to say tonight is it has gone from 78 homes, or 33 homes to 78 homes to now a commercial center. When is it gonna stop? And when do the people who invested in custom homes in the neighborhoods down here, why does their quality of life not matter? I understand that that will be developed, but we need to take care and pride in the city of Reno. We need to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. You don't see that in Connecticut on one side of the street. We need to do things right the first time. And we have the opportunity here tonight to do that. And all of the people who invested in the properties around it for their quality of life need to be respected. So I want to ask tonight that you look at why in the staff report there wasn't a compliance issue on the roundabout. Right, Mountain Gate was mandated to put in a $130,000 roundabout at the top of our hill or entrance to our private road so that we would not have their expected traffic. That was not mentioned tonight. It was basically erased from the 2008 paperwork. That is not okay. And it needs to be discussed. This needs to be shelved, and the commercial center should not go in at all. They're profiting off of all the people they built houses for. Thank you.
Thank you. Tam Ngo, followed by Jeff Kilborn.
Hello, my name's Tam. I'm a homeowner near the housing division, and I'd like to express my shared concerns along with my neighbors that have brought up the regards to this project and the increased additional housing. Due to the recent apartment complex development, I've already seen increased traffic flow along Wedge and Arrow Creek Parkway, and I feel that this additional development would be on Wedge would be kind of ill-equipped to handle the traffic. My wife and I frequently walk our dog, and we head to the library, and as such, being west of Whites Creek, we walk over and have to cross Wedge Parkway, where there is a pedestrian crosswalk, but many people fail to yield. It's already a safety concern for us, and we feel with the additional flow of traffic, it'd be not very accommodating for us to go there. As an adjacent homeowner, I would also want to express my concerns that of the increased traffic that the Mountain Gate residents would be kind of incentivized to head west and to make their way off to Arrow Creek Parkway, as it's a lot easier for them to make a right turn, use our private roads, which would be more dangerous to walk on for us as well because there are no sidewalks. In addition to the increased maintenance costs for the private roads to be maintained properly. I hope the Planning Commission takes into consideration the safety and increased congestion as a result of that, and I guess we'll hear from there. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff Kilborn.
Hello. I don't live in the immediate neighborhood. I live on Zalesi, and I work at the Rayleigh store, so I travel Wedge Parkway, Arrow Creek Parkway. Have a senior up the hill in school, and a younger child is in Len school, will probably be in this traffic path also. So traffic is my main concern. I want to say that I missed the 2014 meeting. I've never been to a meeting like this before. I saw the signs where we used to walk our dog there, and everybody loved that open lot. But I understand the difference between open space and undeveloped property. A lot of people don't. They think that just because they are using somebody else's land that they get to use it in perpetuity. And I have a lot of sympathy for the developers. I believe in the Constitution, the rights of property. So I would weigh in on their side for their right to use their property, but that it stay within the conditions and covenants that existed. Somebody shared an article with me that somebody wrote to the newspaper. I didn't think very highly of you all. He all would accuse you of being on the take or being in the pocket of the developers. I don't know anything about that, but I've heard talk of a traffic circle, and it sounds like promises were made that aren't being kept. And I want you all to think about that. Everybody says they've driven by the property or they've met with the developers. How many of you have met with the people that live right across the street and are going to be impacted the most? These are our homes. I'm not one of those, I've got my house, good luck getting yours guys. I'm not saying no more development. People have a right to their property and to build on it, and other people can live here too, but doubling the size and building those apartments, that's been a nightmare. A traffic circle would have been so much better where that stoplight is. And why on earth is the red light got to go straight into Mountain Gate or turn right in one lane and a left turn pocket for the other? Wouldn't it make sense to have people going straight into Mountain Gate wait with the people for a red light while those who want to make a right turn on red can do so? Because now we're stuck there behind somebody who wants to go into Mountain Gate. It goes to the Planning Commission. Who makes these plans? Let's start planning something. Let's, come up with a good plan, a better plan. Listen to people, respect their property rights. Like I said, I respect the rights of developers to their property. I respect the Constitution. I was, sad that we were going to lose where we walked the dog and the model airplane people flew their radio-controlled planes. But I understand that, I would be more sad if we lost the Constitution, if a bunch of people could get together and vote somebody else off their own property. I'm not for that. But people are being impacted here. So they have their rights too, and that's in the Constitution also. And that's the bottom line. We have to keep the promises that were made to the people in the neighborhood and think of a sensible way to handle this traffic. Well, lastly, the school district is talking about putting a middle school at Arrow Creek and Thomas Creek Road. But a two-lane road can't serve a middle school. What about a land swap? Let them develop up there. Think about it, please.
Thank you. I do not have any other requests to speak forms. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak? Have you come up and state your name and then fill out a form when you're complete?
When I'm done. All right, thank you. Dan Fitzsimmons. I am also a homeowner in the properties south of this project. I was very impressed back in 2004 with what Ryder and Mountain Gate did. People to the north of the existing Mountain Gate project on the other side of Arrow Creek were complaining that they were going to lose their views. And the project looks like it has the okay to be here. What I would request, at minimum, they made the project put lot sizes that match ours along Whites Creek. I would also like that there would be an architectural buffer zone there, that those houses backing up to Whites Creek not be two-story. that at least, number one, the lot sizes are bigger, so they could handle a one-story footprint. And they could give us a little more of a buffer to, okay, they're gonna have their 2 stories back in the project, but it would give us a buffer zone for a little bit of a view there. They made that compromise on the north side with the people on Flanders to the north side of the Mountain Gate. They said no 2-story homes. It was a nice compromise. I thought that was a good deal. With all the traffic that everybody's talking about, it is unbelievable to me that this report says the builder is not gonna do anything with Whites Creek. That Whites Creek Lane is currently a country lane. It is now gonna have, as these folks have pointed out, all kinds of traffic from this subdivision. I, selfishly, where I live, I wasn't even thinking about the people to the west who are now gonna have their more private place inundated with traffic sneaking out there up to Arrow Creek. I would propose probably traffic studies up the wazoo needed to be done, but the traffic coming downhill on Wedge, at Wedge and Whites Creek in front of the library is a nightmare. It's a speed zone. They place cops out there all the time to settle this down. You put a roundabout at Whites Creek and Wedge, you now slow traffic downhill on Wedge, allow the people in the commercial entrance and the other entrance to this subdivision to be able to even get out of their subdivision safely. That traffic has to be slowed down. I come out of my subdivision at Wedge and Whites Creek every day, and I have to look 2, 3, and 10 times to my right for downhill traffic coming flying out of nowhere. Okay, they fly there, and the sheriffs park themselves and do their traffic watches regularly. So you're gonna have crosswalk to the library and all this traffic. You got the hockey arenas coming online. You've heard it all. Not even half of the apartments are online right now, and you're hearing the traffic problems. My fear and concern is that these projects are looked at in and of themselves, and in and of themselves, they can show you that they meet traffic flows for their project, but is it incorporated into the traffic flows that are now coming online everywhere there? Went to the Planning Commission meeting, or a meeting for the hockey arena. Everybody's feedback was, you guys have to put in enough parking. There's no room for parking now. We get overflow parking, softball, Little League days in our subdivision. Okay, now we're gonna have the hockey arena. Now we're gonna have 78 homes. I agree with the gentleman that they get to develop this project. So they're developing it with more houses than we want. Please make a buffer zone on the Whites Creek Lane houses, no 2 stories. And please seriously think about slowing traffic down Wedge with a roundabout. I think it would save a lot of lives down the line. And it's no fun to have traffic fixes after we've had enough deaths to warrant it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. You can go see
Dan?
Michelle. She'll have you fill out a card. Thank you. Anyone else care to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Who'd like to start us off? Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Hawkins. This is for staff. Possible we can get signage put in, White Creek Lane, saying residents only like we do up at the university and several other areas.
Where the road becomes private. I was at the site today. I didn't see any sign. Chris Baker, the representative, said that there is currently one there, that it's overgrown, one sign. It's a private road. It's not under the city's jurisdiction.
What about when the people that want to go to the hockey arena or the softball, baseball parks, and they overflow into the neighborhood, not specifically Whites Creek Lane, but in their neighborhood? What can we do for them?
So when you're talking about a hockey arena, there is no hockey arena. That may or may not be a future project and would be
You've got a
evaluated
library, you've
on
got
its
sports
own.
complex fields there. You still have people parking in the residential area, according to the gentleman who just spoke.
That's an existing situation. There's an existing tentative subdivision approval here.
What about the roundabout?
Which roundabout are you referring to? The one in the Whites
One
Creek?
the gentleman just talked about.
That is the Whites Creek subdivision. Let me give some perspective. This whole entire area was developed under the WDDP plan. It was adopted in Washoe County in 1993. It uncovered this entire area, including the area to the west of the subdivision. There is a roundabout there. That was also part of this WDD plan. That area is no longer, that was in the city's sphere of influence. It was withdrawn. It's in Washoe County. That's a separate product. So I'm not sure exactly what your question is referring to with the roundabout in that direction.
The roundabout at Whites Creek and Wedge?
That doesn't.
No, there's talk of two roundabouts.
Commissioner Marshall, I'd like to direct questions to staff and audience. Please don't weigh in on this. If we have a question, we'll bring you back up. Let's see if we can get staff to respond and the applicant first. We can't have additional comments from the audience while this is going on. Thank you.
Commissioners, if I think I'm understanding your question, Commissioner Hawkins, they're referring to a roundabout due west of this subdivision. It's in Washoe County. That subdivision was part of this overall WDDP plan. I can't speak to the specifics of that approval. That was done over a decade ago. I don't know the specifics of requirements for that particular subdivision.
Okay.
Nathan, maybe I'll follow up and see if I'm understanding. I believe the concern that I heard from the staff was the situation at the end of this development on the west end of this development, the area that is shown there as as an enlarged paving area. Question is, what exactly are we looking at there? Is there a requirement for that? The concern about this is a private road from Wedge moving to the west, as I understand it, but it appears that there's some level of development that's happening at the edge of this parcel prior to the roundabout moving further to the west.
That's correct. In the 2014 approval, there was a sort of a turnaround area proposed that's maintained in this subdivision design toward the west of the project on the project site. Again, this is a private road, and the signage that indicates a private road or no trespassing, no public easement, I didn't see it. That's something that those residents could pursue. But the applicant's proposal maintains that turnaround, should that be an option, should they choose to gate or appropriately enhance the signage indicating that it's private property and no trespassing, that turnaround would be available there and of course, within the subdivision.
And so then, understanding that this being a private road, what, if any, requirements does the city have to place upon that turnaround in terms of large emergency access or, I guess in terms of development or requirements that would be put upon this particular parcel? Is there anything in code that we're looking at? Is there a specific requirement for the dimensions on that, or is this just something that's being placed there at the terminus of this particular project? Janelle.
Hi, Janelle Thomas, Senior Civil Engineer for the record. So I think that there's a misunderstanding as to the designation of the roadway of Whites Creek Lane. The portion that is abutting their property is actually a public roadway, and it becomes private past the bulb here, there. And so they are going to be doing some improvements to Whites Creek Lane. They are required to do a half-street improvement with the associated curb, gutter, sidewalk, and associated landscaping along it on the side of the property that they own, which is the north side of Whites Creek Lane. Correct? Okay. Does that help clarify?
That clarifies. So just as a follow-up, so that bulb, I guess that's the question I have in terms of, are there specific City of Reno dimensions? Since you've identified it's not a private road. Looking at that as a turnaround, if we were to look at the terminus of that for the City of Reno, how would that be treated dimensionally in order to accommodate any type of emergency access?
So according to the plans that have been presented thus far, and as part of the tentative map application, the paved width would be 52 feet from front face of curb to front face of curb. And that does provide sufficient width for vehicles to turn around at that terminus of the public road.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Marshall, did you want
Gina, could I ask, you mentioned that as a condition of approval or as were there requirements there, right now, there's no sidewalks on White Creek's Lane, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and as a result of this project, there will be a sidewalk on the north side?
That is correct. And it will tie into the existing sidewalk infrastructure that abuts Wedge Parkway.
Right. If I have questions about the traffic work that was done, who would that?
Me.
Was there any distribution of trips coming out of the Wedge Parkway versus White Creeks? Were there any assumptions on where traffic's going to be flowing? How much is going to be coming out of White's Creek versus the Wedge Parkway? Ingress and egress?
Yes. So I am actually going to defer to the traffic engineer, Paul Seleghi, who conducted the study, and it does address your questions.
Okay.
Well, good evening. For the record, I'm Paul Seleghi. I prepared the traffic study. In terms of that access on White's Creek, I'm looking, our project traffic study shows only the highest peak hour volume using that west access on White's Creek, amounting to only 7 vehicles in one direction at a time. I was going to look at the total trip generation and give you a comparison of the total trip generation. There's between the commercial and the residential, there's 164 peak hour trips.
Right. Well, the commercial is only going to be coming onto Wedge because there's no other point of ingress or egress. Is that right?
All right. So then the single family homes,
Right.
for the single family homes, that's 78. So there, during the evening peak hour, there would be 7 vehicles. Hold on, let me make sure I quote this correctly. There would be 7 vehicles in and 5 vehicles out. So 12 vehicles compared to a total of 78 for the single family. So that's about 1/6 or so. So about 5/6 of the traffic will use the Wedge access, 1/6 use the west access on White's Creek. So a small assignment.
And how did
because
you-
the access is pushed so far west, people going east are hesitant to travel west to go east. And so it makes sense that the assignment would be loaded that way, heavily to the east.
And did you make that trip distribution based on the length of White's Creek, or the fact that it's set so far to the west? Or did you use some determination of how those trips are going to be split between the 2 points of entry?
We make those distributions looking at the positioning of the lots, and then we review it based on travel time. Our experience is that commuters will find the most efficient route. So if it's faster, if you're headed to the freeway or where most of the traffic is to the east, you travel out, you make your left, you stay in your direction.
So
a few lots around this axis, it would compete time-wise. And so it's based on travel distance. It's based on calculated distances.
And that's based on holding the condition on Wedge Parkway consistent over time? So you're either making your left, presumably making your right will be a lot easier than making a left across Wedge? And if that becomes more problematic, would you see traffic shifting to the other entrance or exit?
Well, our analysis of the accesses on Wedge Parkway, we showed level of service C operation, which indicates minimal delays, not extensive delays, not enough delay that would cause somebody to change the route, in our opinion.
if there's so minimal trips, and I don't know if this is a question for you or for Nathan, is there a requirement to have an alternative, we need 2 points of ingress and egress?
Janelle Thomas for the record again. Yeah, so each of our developments, as they're designed and they're presented, they are required to have 2 means of ingress and egress. And we also have the fire department review those layouts for their adherence to that standard.
Was the 2014 approval, do you know, it was less density of the housing in order, because I assume it was where the area of the commercial was, but there was still in 2014, there was an exit onto or an entrance on Whites Creek. So did the entrances and exits stay the same since 2014? I think it did because somebody mentioned that they lost that issue.
It did. Nathan Gilbert for the record. I just wanted to provide an overview from, this is the existing entitlement, the existing tentative subdivision approval on this site, and it certainly did have access from White's Lane.
Thank you. And is there going back to the other exhibit, Nathan, is that a pedestrian connection between the commercial and the residential area?
Yes, it is. In the open space, there are 3 points of connection from the commercial center into the interior of the north side of the subdivision, and again down to Whites Creek Lane. Thank you. So lacking my pen.
Could you point those out?
So this is
Were you talking about the open space connectivity, or?
No, I'm talking about the connectivity between the neighborhood and the commercial.
There is a connection, yes, to the south of the commercial center. In addition to linking the commercial center through the open space with access points in the subdivision, there's also on the Whites Creek Lane a sidewalk and proposed parkway strip.
Thank you. I noticed that in
Commissioner Marshall, can I jump in on that real quick? Nathan, the connectivity between the residential area and the commercial area, is that pedestrian bicycle connectivity only, or is that for vehicle traffic?
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Between the residential to the commercial, there is a pathway that you just pointed to. Is that limited to residential/bicycles, or does that include motor vehicles?
I believe it was an emergency access, but pedestrian and bicycle for.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Marshall.
The intersection of White Creek and Wedge, I noticed that, I think it was in this one, there was in the NAB meeting, there was some suggestion of perhaps of a hawk flashing beacon on that intersection or that crosswalk there to help. Was that considered?
That is addressed in the conditions of approval, but I think should the commission wish to enhance that, I have spoken with the applicant's representative when they're agreeable to enhancing that. There is currently pedestrian signage, pedestrian crosswalk at that intersection. That would be something that we would look at, and if Planning Commission wanted to make that more explicit, that would be appropriate.
And would that be using the hawk flasher? Is that the appropriate?
It may be staff would want to do appropriate analysis on that, but if the intention is to evaluate and provide enhanced pedestrian safety measures, flashers would probably be the most appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Weisky, would that slow you down too much on the descent coming? Okay, just checking. Nathan, the parking requirements for the commercial, is that another comment in the neighborhood advisory, the NAB notes was that it seems to be overparked. Do you have numbers of what the minimums requirement would be and what there actually are?
What they provided is a tentative review of a tentative mix. What staff does when we review either building permits or more specifically business licensing, we'll look at what type of use it is. So obviously a restaurant, based on the volume, is going to have more parking demand than an office type of use. So that mix is established in code. And any parking provided over that establishment actually has to provide more landscaping. But they provided a reasonable estimate of what they would anticipate, but that'll be reviewed further with building plans and business licensing.
I'm sorry, you said one thing I didn't quite grasp, and that is if they're overparked, it triggers additional landscaping requirements? And could you just walk me through those, please?
If they provide more parking than is required for the base use, they're only allowed to pursue that if they were to enhance the landscaping on site.
Okay, and I have a question for the developer. Sorry, I blanked on your name.
Chris Baker for the
Chris,
record.
I'm sorry. Any response to the neighborhood request about one-story limitation on Whites Creek?
In regards to that, again, as Nathan pointed out, the map that's currently approved on there doesn't have conditions for 1 stories.
I understand, but so you're saying no, in other words?
Yeah. We're again, the site as approved allows for 1 and 2 story units. There are 1 and 2 story units adjacent to the site. The site actually does sit a little bit below the adjacent subdivision. And with the increased buffer, parkway strip, the other improvements that are required as the current approval, realistically, we don't feel it's necessary at this point.
So you're unwilling to place that on that front line of Whites Creek?
Correct. Again, there's a current tentative map that does not prohibit 2-story units there. And truthfully, there could be only 1 stories there. The lots there are edge matching. They're 86-foot wide minimum, which is similar to what's in the adjacent subdivision. So they're the bigger lots. But at this point, without having even bedroom mixes or floor plans or anything developed, I think it would be a little bit premature for us to say yay or nay on that.
Okay, you said something that was interesting. You said that because of the lot size, there could only be 1-story?
No. I said those
I'm
lots
sorry.
are larger on that side.
Right.
There was a comment from the public earlier that stated they wish that those lots were larger in size, and they actually are larger in size.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think that about exhausts my questions.
Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Weisky.
Vice Chair Johnson. Janelle? On White Star, no,
Whites Creek?
yeah, excuse me. Whites Creek Road from Wedge Parkway west to the bubble. Does the city of Reno have jurisdiction of that road as far as to condition how that street, the north side of the street, Centerline North, gets built as far as sidewalk, curb, that type of thing?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Janelle
so
Thomas for the
we
record.
could also condition the north side to be no parking, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's just a vehicular traffic and then a sidewalk, and that's all it is?
Correct.
Okay. Do we have the ability to condition this project to put a roundabout in at Wedge Parkway and Whites Creek, the intersection there?
In my professional opinion, it is not warranted, but we would examine that as a warrant. From the traffic numbers that have been presented thus far, it does not appear to be a warrant that would be met.
Does that include the traffic conditions for existing traffic counts coming south from Mount Rose Highway, heading
Yes.
north to Arrow Creek. That's overall. That is not just what is being added to by the two components of this project.
No, so when we had the traffic study performed, or when the applicant presented that, the material that is represented represents both the existing condition, the existing plus the proposed project conditions, and then an outlook into the 2040 timeframe.
Okay. And just for one more, just for clarification, we cannot condition anything on Whites Creek south of the center line as far as no parking, sidewalk, curbs, and gutters to this project.
I'm not certain on that. But generally, we require half-street improvements adjacent to the property that's being developed, because we don't really have the jurisdiction or the authority to require additional improvements.
Right. It's not like they're adding a brand-new street. It's an
Right.
existing street, so their improvements would
Correct.
just be to their side of the street?
That is correct.
But if it were a new street, then we could possibly condition more of it.
Yes, if that was their primary access, it didn't exist prior to the development being pursued, then typically, yes, they have to construct complete street
Okay.
for that access.
Thank you. No further questions right now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Weisky. Additional questions? I have a couple. I'll take my turn. Janelle, I'll start with you on the same issue with traffic. Looking at the commercial development and the access point to the proposed commercial development, am I to understand that is a complete intersection? There's no limitations in terms of restrictions on left turn out, right in, right out only? Are there any of those restrictions proposed based on what we're looking at here?
In the current configuration and the current proposal, no. That is a complete intersection, and it was intentionally designed to coincide with the drive access to the apartment complex across the street, so that we didn't end up with offset access points on that stretch.
Okay, so then at that point in time, we're basically looking at another four-way intersection, but uncontrolled based on the traffic counts that we're seeing here. Is that what's proposed?
Yes, there will be stop condition on the east and west legs.
Okay. And so now I'm going to follow up, I think, with Mr. Salegi. With respect to the traffic counts that you've shown for this project, and I don't see in the staff report here, what is the additional traffic shown in your presentation or your analysis attributed directly to the commercial, above and beyond just the residential?
The commercial would generate a total of 1,495 daily trips, with 34 trips in the morning and 130 in the afternoon peak hours.
So looking at this as we're being asked to, with the addition of the commercial, all of those trips would currently not exist under the current approved tentative map.
That's correct. Those are new trips and be assigned to this new intersection that aligns with the apartments.
Does your analysis include the number of trips generated on the east leg of that particular interchange? Basically, the number of trips from the apartments coming in at that same side. Was that a part of your analysis?
Yes, we did the study for the apartment project also when it was approved. And so we had the complete volumes, and so assigned all of those volumes. The combined volumes still are functioning at level of service C with all of the apartments plus the commercial.
At that intersection.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I think that answers that question. And I guess, Nathan, I'll follow up with you. Can you put the existing approved tentative map back up there? So in that scenario, am I correct to assume that that northerly entrance onto Wedge is in the same location, relatively speaking, as what is proposed for the commercial aspect?
It's relatively speaking.
Okay, so all of the issues that we're looking at for that interchange exist essentially the same way for this one, but under a different traffic count.
Yes, Mr. Salegi's traffic analysis looked at current, existing, and proposed conditions.
I think that answers that question. Thank you. Oh, sorry, and then I will ask, Nathan, I'm sorry, I turned the page, my bad. There was a requirement, condition number 31, tying into Commissioner Weiske's questions about the half-street improvements on Whites Creek. Is there also a requirement for half-street improvements and/or paving repair on Wedge? I didn't see that listed in what we were looking at here.
Janelle Thomas for the record. Yeah, there were no improvements required on Wedge Parkway. It is already constructed to our standard street standards.
So anything other than street cut, repair, anything like that? Okay.
Yeah, so for utility ties, things like that, if they have utilities that are going to tie into facilities that are already under Wedge Parkway, they'll apply for a separate permit through our Public Works Department.
Okay. Thank you.
And if I could piggyback on that, along Wedge Parkway, there is about an 8-foot strip between the subject property and public right-of-way. We've conditioned that to be landscaped and be included as part of the overall aesthetic.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Marshall, questions?
Nathan, sorry. Okay, we've got just 78 single-family residences. Where do these fit in our overall count for, when we just did the master plan, we had a lot of information regarding our inventory. Does this housing type fit within the kind that we are oversupplied with, or the kind that we need more of?
This is in a specific plan district adopted in 1993. There is specific unit counts allocated within that. And this is within the threshold of that adopted SPD handbook.
Not quite what I was asking, but I don't know if our planning director would want to take a shot at that. Do we know that this, to me, if I remember right, this housing stock is, we have plenty of this particular housing stock, and it's not the kind of housing stock that we are currently short of. Is that an accurate representation?
I think you're talking about the Claudia Hansen, planning manager, that missing middle portion that we discussed during Reimagine Reno. It is, I would agree with your statement.
Thank you. And then, Nathan, if we were to, it seems like there's a lot of things that are kind of, maybe it's just the way that I look at this, there's a lot of things that are in flux. We're talking about potentially increased recreational opportunities off to the east. I am sensitive to the concerns of the existing neighborhood and of that lane. I'm wondering, is there some sort of condition that we can craft regarding monitoring of the Whites Creek exit and entrance, and if it exceeds what is projected by the traffic analysis, i.e. if you get more people and more traffic coming out onto Whites Creek, for whatever reason, the intersection on Wedge is disfavored, do can you think of something that if it is greater than the amount projected, that we have some sort of mitigation or something else that we can require, I'm trying to come up with something that allows us to say, okay, if you're only saying there's going to be a small amount of traffic, 5 cars one way and 7 cars the other way per day, that, otherwise we're going to have a significantly greater impact on White's Creek. Any
You're referring
thoughts
to
on-
specifically the White Creek's Lane intersection?
No, well, not so much the intersection on White's Creek and Wedge, but the use of that, let's say there's, for some reason, the left into the new neighborhood I don't know why this would be the case, but coming across Wedge at the eastern entrance becomes, really, it's a pain in the butt because there's so much traffic going past, you can't do it. So we put in a beacon, or there's a roundabout on White's Creek and Wedge, and all of a sudden people now can go up White's Creek and get in. They don't have to wait to cross left on the traffic. If that happens, you're going to be increasing, this is a hypothetical, you're increasing the usage of that western entrance and the usage of White's Creek. What I'm looking for is some kind of, let's monitor that. If it becomes a significant problem, we can do something about it, rather than just assume that that situation, which seems to be dependent on a lot of different factors, remains. Am I like?
Well, I would look to my colleague, but my initial thoughts are that would probably be most feasible with the commercial component, because we have businesses, new businesses, as they come and renew their licenses, we could evaluate that. What evaluating once the subdivision's built, the homes are built, and the developer's out, I'm not sure who we could bring back in if that were the case.
Well, we can, I think we have lots of flexibility with, different types of requirements on the subdivision. But, so I don't know if Janelle is standing ready to.
Janelle Thomas, Senior Civil Engineer, for the record. I think with a subdivision of this small magnitude, it becomes not really effective to have a check back on something like that on White's Creek Lane. I think that even if all of the traffic from the subdivision utilized White's Creek Lane, I'm not completely convinced that it would exceed the level of service threshold that we would be concerned about. We have placed kind of check back conditions on, as Nathan referred to, as commercial projects that we've had in the past. But yeah, I'm not real sure how effective that would be in this particular case.
Here's the situation that I see that comes to us repeatedly is a development of city-type intensities next to what was developed under county, or is this still county south of White's Creek?
Yes.
So adjacent to county, more suburban densities, and all of a sudden lifestyles are changing, and we're proving this now based on the fact that we're running a relatively small number of cars down White's Creek. So we're going to allow them to have this density because of all the numbers work. And I understand that technically, if you push all the cars through White's Creek, you may not change your LOS, but you certainly are going to change the experience of an existing neighborhood. And I do think that is something that, in terms of the city's development patterns adjacent to existing suburban development, that we should take care when we do something like that. So I'm trying to find some kind of device here that says if the basis on which we're making our decision here to allow this in intensity of use prove to be incorrect, that there's something that we can do about it that doesn't that we unless we want to say, well, neighborhood, if it turns out you got all this traffic, that's just the way of the world.
I would like to inquire, kind of consult with the developer to find out how they plan to phase this, because if the phasing is such that it may provide an opportunity for that check back, say even 50%, if they're going to do it in 2 phases, you could do a check back and see if there were mitigation opportunities there for doing something. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is the requirement for 2 entrances and exits one that is based on fire? So if this is gated, could it be shut off to only emergency ingress and egress and not to neighborhood use? Or do we require 2 points of ingress and egress for fundamental, for other reasons, including safety? So,
Well, typically you have 2 means of ingress and egress, and one of those may be an emergency access. So I'm not sure what the appetite is for gating that as an emergency access are you suggesting the Whites Creek Lane?
Yes.
Access being a gated access only?
And I'm just saying that's fairly draconian, but that is a possible option if all of a sudden all the traffic is coming through Whites Creek rather than on Wedge, which was the presumption that we're approving, potentially approving this on.
Mm-hmm.
Would that violate is that a possibility under our requirements?
I think it probably is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Commissioner Wieski.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson. Chris, can I get you to come up front, please, to the podium? Wedge, do you have an enlarged view of the Wedge Parkway into the commercial aspect that we could look at? So, excuse me. What I'm looking at is Wedge Parkway, northbound traffic, wanting to make a left turn into the shopping center, this commercial area. Are they going to have a dedicated left turn lane?
Is there one there? No, there's not one there now, and there's not proposed to be one.
No. So is it going to be a double yellow line? If that's what's existing?
I don't know. What's.
I mean, you want to. What I'm trying to get at is, we're going to stop traffic while a car wants to, at a peak hour, make a left turn into the commercial area? That's why I wanted the applicant to give the responses they designed it.
Well, yeah, and generally, yeah, he's a planner. So what I'll say is it's going to be a functional entrance to the site. So I would imagine that there will be a break in the yellow to allow that access point. That's my perception of what I'm anticipating to see. And then as a general rule, everybody would have to follow the rules of the road. And if somebody wants to turn left, they turn on their blinker and traffic behind them waits. So, but.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. I was just trying to get, yes. Never mind. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wieski. Additional questions for staff or the applicant? I'll ask one. Chris, you will. A lot of discussion about, obviously, the access on Whites Creek. What is the position if that was to be emergency access only? How does that impact what we're looking at here? I know we have other places that just have a single main access and the secondary emergency access.
That would have to be something that is reviewed by fire and by city to double check that that's going to meet their standards. Again, like Jadell stated, typically they're going to want 2 points of ingress, egress.
And I'm not
yeah.
saying we're eliminating I'm saying that becomes emergency access only off of Whites Creek. I'm posing the question because that is within the area of discussion that we've had this evening.
And again, I might be a little confused, but the current proposal, so what's approved out there currently, has the same amount of trip traffic going out there now.
I understand that, but you've applied for a new tentative map.
Correct.
So everything's on the table.
Correct.
So I am posing the question to you, if we as the Planning Commission put that out, that can be used for emergency access only, knowing that we still have 2 points of access for emergency vehicles into the property. What is your...
I'd have to double check with the applicant, and we'd have to check to see from design criteria standpoint how that would affect the development. You know, that's not a simple yes or no question, I don't think, right now.
I understand. I think, but Commissioner Marshall asked if that was something that worked within what the city was able to do from an overall tentative map, and it sounds like that is a potential. So I just wanted to ask that question now. We'll have some further discussion, obviously, about it, but I just wanted to get...
And again, that's something I can discuss with the applicant and see what their appetite is for that.
Okay. Okay. We'll talk about that in discussion, and if we need to have some additional feedback from you, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Commissioner Marshall.
No, there's a game on. Mr. Endries, can I ask a question? What? Ah.
That was an acceptable response from the audience. Thank you.
Yes.
I was a little puzzled by your request to do something. And I don't understand quite what your issue is. There's going to be traffic. I mean, is it more of traffic coming through onto your private road?
Let's talk a moment, if you will, Mr. Marshall, about this whole area. There already is a lot of traffic coming into our private road that we're going to have to manage and deal with. This is going to create more traffic, more interest, another avenue of opportunity for people, as we just heard today. If people don't want to go down Whites Creek eastward toward Wedge, because keep in mind, this development really only has 2 points of entrance and exit, and that's Wedge Parkway.
Let me ask, if we turn that Whites Creek entrance into an emergency egress and ingress only, would that solve your issue?
That would solve a lot of the issues for Whites Creek, and maybe even the residents who appeared earlier too about the development to the south of Whites Creek.
Okay.
That may resolve those types of issues. But, and it might even, buy us more time until our association can deal with, as this is developed, how we are going to ultimately cut off all access from all of the public to our housing
kind of
division.
really appreciate you
So
doing
that's
the public service there for letting the public come through.
So that's what we may have to be dealing with, a lot of planning and working maybe with the
Okay.
with the developer. But I think
I don't mean to cut you off, but I think that answers my question.
Okay,
So
very
that's-
good.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may add something, and I was going to wait for discussion, but because of Commissioner Marshall's discussion that he just had, I heard this project in 2014. So I have a little history with it. We had the same discussions back then. Matter of fact, that's where the bulb came from. And back in 2014, the association was going to start working on putting up a gate and gating off that road to the west at that time. 3.5 years later, it sounds like we're still getting ready to have that conversation for whatever it's worth.
Thank you, Commissioner Weisky. Are there any other questions, or should we just continue with our discussion? Okay, no further questions. Who wants to start us off on discussion?
Vice Chair Johnson, Commissioner Weisky. I'll start it off. I look at this differently today than I did in 2014 because of the commercial aspect to it. I believe our meeting on just the agenda item for the 78 homes went longer than what we've spent tonight in chambers. It was a lot of discussion, a lot of questions and answers about how to deal with traffic. And I'll disagree with the applicant's representative in saying it's the same project that was brought before us and approved in 2014, and it's not. We've seen two different maps tonight. The houses were more spread out. The traffic pattern was different. We're now adjusting a traffic pattern and putting a commercial component onto Wedge Parkway that wasn't there before. So I respectfully disagree with the attitude that it's the same, and I think we have an opportunity to look at it differently. I look forward to hearing to see if the applicant can make a decision this evening on whether the Whites Creek access can be used as an emergency access only. But one thing that I would like to have considered by the commission is, at least on the north side of Whites Creek, that it be posted, painted red and posted no parking with the development of the sidewalk, curbs and gutters and roadway. So if you all would consider that in your comments, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Weisky. I'll follow up on that. Speaking as somebody who has used the facilities at South Valleys numerous times, and I believe parked on Whites Creek on more than one occasion, having to cross that street. Well, there's no it's not listed, no parking now. There is a parking concern. And I have a small car, as I've said before, and I still had to park over there. My biggest concern with this, and I find it interesting that what we've got before us tonight is a request to revise to bring commercial into play for this. And of the public comment that we received, probably less than 5% touched on the aspect of that, other than comments about it not being desirable. The concern that I have, and that was very specifically one of the questions that I asked, if traffic is the biggest concern down there, and we heard a bunch of that, adding commercial into this project, it increases the traffic. It's the very thing that is before us that would be an issue. And so when I look at our special use permit findings, which the special use permit is a result of the commercial and the residential adjacency, one of the findings is that the proposal adequately mitigates traffic impacts and provides a safe pedestrian environment. This puts 3 points of access onto Wedge Parkway instead of the 2 that are existing. This encourages pedestrian traffic from the apartments, from the ball fields, to come to what could be, set up for post-game pizza, which again, I would probably partake in that. But I don't feel as though what we've got here is actually making the situation better, despite the issues with the flashers at the crosswalk. What's before us now, I can't, the way it's presented, make finding D based on the special use permit for that reason, because I think what we're doing is we're intensifying the use in an area that's already been extremely intensified based on the apartments that have gone in there. So I appreciate what Commissioner Weisky is saying, and I think maybe this goes back to the question, and Chris, while you're standing there, I guess I can throw this out as a discussion point. If the Whites Creek portion becomes emergency access only, you are back to 2 points of access. That gets closer to what we're looking at here. So I know you've had a few minutes. Would you care to respond to my question before about whether that change is something that would be
In conferring with the applicant, truthfully, that's something we're going to have to actually analyze a little bit further. We're going to have to cross-reference with fire. We're going to have to cross-reference with city engineering and see how that affects kind of that whole area. Because we do have, that would include a requirement for a full turnaround bulb inside the gated access. Then there is also the provided turnaround bulb on Whites Creek now. Again, I don't think that's something we can just look at lightly and say, sure, if traffic, warrants it and the traffic study is off a little bit from actual numbers, we can go ahead and just gate that. I don't think that's something we can easily say now. And hearing some of the commission's concerns, maybe for left turn into the commercial portion, and maybe looking at some additional ways to mitigate some of the pedestrian connectivity. Again, we've committed to work with the city on that, and if that does involve a flashing component at the existing crosswalk at Whites, we're fine with that. But I think what we would request is to continue this so we can analyze what ultimately, if it does end up going that route as far as gated emergency access on Whites Creek, what that would do to this overall development and some of the external street network.
Okay, I appreciate that. I will let the Commissioner Weisky weigh in on that and see if that's something that other commissioners would be willing to go down that route. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Commissioner Vice Chair Johnson. Chris, thank you for that offer, because that was a question I was going to have for you before we got done with discussion. But I didn't want to interrupt discussion because it's important to get everybody's thoughts out while they are, but I would be more than happy to make that motion after discussion is over.
Thank you, Commissioner. Additional discussion? Commissioners? If not, Commissioner Marshall.
If the motion is to continue, then I don't think I need to further discuss.
I would appreciate the discussion prior to any motion for continuance.
I think this project is poorly designed in terms of the components that it has, and the impact that it has on the adjacent neighborhood, and particularly on Whites Creek Lane. I personally, would like to see a better integration, and with a one-story requirement on the Whites Creek side. I'd like to see either a monitoring or closing the west egress and ingress point to emergency only. I personally have issues with us continuing to approve single-family residences without any sort of multifamily component when we already have the supply we need for single family. And doesn't seem to meet a product aimed at the area that we're in short supply of. So I would be in favor of continuance in hope of a redesign, a better project.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Commissioner Hawkins.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to ditto that on Commissioner Marshall's continuance as well.
Commissioner Weisky, I will throw this one back to you then.
With that, Mr. Vice Chair, in the case of LDC 18-00013, Mountain Gate 78, I make a motion for continuation, and I would like to refer to Claudia, or defer to Claudia, for a date certain, or do we want to leave it open, Claudia?
I would probably look to the applicant. The soonest we could get it back would be December 7th. So I don't know if they can get us information turned around in 3 weeks. That would be the deadline for them.
Okay. So December 7th would
I'm
be,
getting a head nod from the applicant, so December 7th.
Chris, would you come up and acknowledge for the record, please, for us? Is December 7th, okay?
Yeah, that is okay.
Thank you very much. So date certain, December 7th for the continuation.
Okay, I have a motion for Commissioner Weisky for continuation.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Marshall. Any additional discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I believe we will see you back here on December 7th to discuss further. With that, I would like to take a brief 10-minute break from the podium. So I'm going to call for that, and we will return at 8:15. and ready to go?
Good. Okay.
Okay, with that, I will bring our meeting back to order, and we will move on to item 6.5, case number LDC 18-00007, Mallard Crossing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Susan Pansky with Rubicon Design Group. I'm here representing Desert Wind Homes for a project called Mallard Crossing. We're requesting a tentative map for 16 single-family townhomes, attached townhomes, and a special use permit, which is being elevated from a site plan review to run concurrently with this tentative map for the townhomes that are required in this multifamily 30 zoning district. So this project is located just north of Brinkby Avenue and south of East Shore Drive along Lakeside Drive. And on that satellite aerial that I have, it's just south of Virginia Lake as well. You can see Virginia Lake right here. This is an infill site, a little bit over 1.25 acres. And we are proposing, as I mentioned, 16 single-family attached townhome units on this site in both 2 and 3 unit buildings. We have only two 3-unit buildings and then 5 2-unit buildings that were being proposed here. Everything is 2-story and each unit has a 2-car garage, and I'll show you that as we are looking at the architecture a little bit later in the presentation. The overall density of this project is 13 units an acre, which is significantly less than what's allowed in the multifamily 30 district. There are actually, I think, 37 units would be allowed if we maximize the zoning of this site. And to that end, as it relates to traffic, because we are so much less in our unit count, we're significantly less on our traffic counts as well. This project does not trigger a traffic study. However, I do have counts from the ITE traffic manual indicating that approximately 94 average daily trips will be generated by this project, as well as 7 a.m. peak trips and 9 p.m. peak trips. You'll note in this site plan that the parcels for these lots are the footprints of the houses, and that's basically a design requirement through City of Reno code that we're complying with. So in this case, the parcel line will be the building wall, and then everything around it will be common area. In this case, the common area will be divided between restricted common area and general common area, everything in the rear yards, and then the side yards between the units, as I'm pointing to on the slide, would be considered restricted common area, as well as in the courtyards that we're proposing on the majority of the units, and then the general common area would be along Lakeside Drive, along the frontage, including the driveway strips and the roadway. Our open space for this project, I believe it's at a requirement of 20%. We have, with all of the open space and common area, not including the streets and the driveway strips, around 40%. We're proposing a 23-foot wide hammerhead roadway. This will be a private road to access all of our units. We are not proposing that this is going to be gated. It's 23 feet, but it includes a 20-foot pavement section, 1 foot on one side and 2 feet on the other side for drainage and curb and gutter. The parking requirements for this site, because each unit has 3 bedrooms, is 52 spaces total, so 1 for each bedroom plus required guest parking. We have a total of 66 spaces. In this particular case, we are allowed to count both the garage parking spaces as well as the driveway parking spaces, so that accounts for not only our resident parking but also our guest parking. And then we are proposing 6 spaces along Lakeside Drive that would be considered guest parking as well. This is our preliminary landscape plan, and based on one of the conditions recommended by staff, we will be modifying this a little bit. We don't have enough trees currently, but we are proposing enhanced landscaping along Lakeside Drive and fully landscaped rear yards. Right now, we're not showing any trees, but staff has recommended a condition of approval that we add trees in the rear yard, and we're fully agreeable to that condition. And you'll note that in the site plan, it's a little bit more noticeable, the driveway strips that we're proposing. And this was something suggested by staff in one of our early meetings, because we have kind of a garage dominant situation onto our private street. It was suggested that in order to soften that hardscape a little bit, that we perhaps consider doing driveway strips instead of standard driveways, and then we would have landscape material in between them. So that's a design concept that we don't see a lot in Reno. We're excited to try it out here, and we'll be working with staff to determine what the appropriate landscape material is in that location. We also work with staff a lot on architecture. This is actually completely different from what we had originally submitted. We're looking at a modern farmhouse architecture style here, and proposing a lot of articulation, including varying roof planes, horizontal and vertical articulation in order to meet the multifamily standards, because this is in the multifamily zoning district. We're proposing courtyards wherever we can, and that is the case actually with everything except for 2 of the homes, and that would be in the middle of the 3-unit building that I'll show in a minute, or house forward design. And then another discussion point we had with staff was related to the garages. We had shown 2-car garages that looked like 2-car garages originally. We've now varied the setbacks, separated those garages so that they don't look quite so dominating on the streetscape. So this is a 2-unit building. This is what you would see on the Lakeside Drive entrance, basically the front yard with front doors facing the street, so it looks more like a front yard facing the street, and it's a little bit more compatible with the single family that's located to the north. And then on the right-hand side here, this is what the street-facing architecture would look like, and then the rear-facing architecture. In the 3-unit building, everything has a 2-car garage except for the end unit, which only has 1. But in the case of the 2 end units, we have courtyards proposed and significant varying architecture. And then the middle unit that we're not able to put a courtyard on, we have proposed building forward architecture as opposed to the garage forward architecture. And finally, we have provided a street rendering which would show what the 2 buildings look like together. This shows, basically it would be the Lakeside Drive side. Here's Lakeside on the left. This would be the 2-unit building, and then the 3-unit building with the courtyards in between. We feel that this is a compatible use and a highly desired housing type in this community, especially for this infill parcel that has single-family, I believe it's duplexes or single-family detached to the north, condominiums to the west, apartments to the east, and a senior living project to the south. I'd like to thank staff for all of their input on this project. We're very excited to move forward, and we are agreeable to all the conditions that have been put forward. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Susan. We'll hear from staff next. Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Planning Commission. Jeff Borkhardt, Associate Planner for the record. Susan covered almost everything, including the conditions that I was going to highlight for this project. So I just had one more. There's a unique condition with the driveway that I want to make sure that we highlight on the record, where the driveway is a little too close to the street here, so these will have to be kicked back slightly in order to meet that driveway separation. But that's pretty much it. Staff did work very closely with the applicant to change the project significantly from what their original design was, and we feel very comfortable with the product and can make all the findings and recommend approval. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. So I'll open this up for public comment in a moment. I'll start with disclosures from Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas visited the site.
Commissioner Marshall, none.
Commissioner Johnson, I'm familiar with the site and I spoke with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Griffith, I'm familiar with the site, and I also saw the applicant do their presentation at the Ward 2 NAB meeting.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site, talked with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Weisky, I rode to the site and spoke with the applicant's representative.
Okay, with that, I'm going to open up public comment on this item. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms on this?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make public comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Do you have any questions? Commissioner Marshall.
Susan, what's your price point for these units?
Price point is low to mid threes,
And what's the square footage?
averaging around 1,800 square feet.
Or 1,800?
Yes.
Jeff, quick question for you. There's an indication in the description about fencing, and that it will be looked at as a part of final map. Was there discussion about fencing on Lakeside as a part of this project?
There was, in the initial proposal for this project, and they carried that forward into this specific design. And so I can talk to you about this specifically. The requirement is going to be for fencing to come off the building side right here.
So no fencing along Lakeside, just off of the back to the north and south?
Correct, and that's what they've proposed on their plans as well.
Okay. One question. Any additional questions? Discussion. Commissioner Weisky, motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Case of LDC 18-00007, Mallard Crossing. Based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the tentative map and special use permit subject to the conditions, and I can make all of the conditions.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Hawkins, second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Good luck with your project. Okay, I'm going to move on and open the next item, which is agenda item 6.6, case number LDC 18-00016, Double R Apartments. Before we start, I'd like to bring it to Commissioner Douglas.
Commissioner Griffith Douglas, for the record, upon consulting with the city attorney, I am recusing myself from LDC 18-00016 Double R Apartments, as I am related to the applicant, Reno Land and Cattle.
Thank you. Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. On this project, I feel I need to recuse myself. I have a vested interest in another business that has space from the applicant, and because of that, I should recuse myself.
Thank you. We will allow you guys a moment to clear the dais. And then we will hear a presentation from the applicant.
They're dropping like flies. Is
I
there anyone
know.
left?
I don't know what you did.
Am I related to anyone else?
Man. They know there's like an inning left in the game.
I
and
guess.
I think that's what's happening, so. Okay, thank you for bearing with us for the delay. I will turn it over.
No problem. Good evening. For the record, my name is Vincent Griffith, owner of Reno Engineering Corporation. Thank you for listening to my presentation this evening on the Double R apartment rezone for the South Meadows PUD. By way of background a little bit, I think I've been hearing a lot of, not criticism, but questions about the Planning Commission and whatnot and doing it right, I guess. And what I could think of that went through my mind is I've been working on the South Meadows PUD since 1993. And I think a few others, in fact, Kevin actually recused himself, but I believe he was on a neighborhood group back in the day when most of this project, the South Meadows, the bulk of it, the PUD manual, was being looked at. And I think as I go through my presentation here and talk to you a little bit about how we might have done things right back then, and planning commissions forced the master developer to build facilities for the future, I think that's really the bulk of our presentation, is that most of this project, from a traffic, utility, and other standpoint, is really already sized for this project. So let's start with where it is in location. And it's actually at the corner of Double R Boulevard, Double R Apartments, and Double Diamond Parkway. That would be here. So it's on the northeast corner, and next to that project, just south, the next exhibit will show us some of the surrounding properties. So just to the south of the site is an existing apartment project. It has probably been up and running for over 8 years now, I believe. And then to the north is the condo project. And then to the north and west is a single family, Huffacre Hills. Directly west is the IGT project. And then I think what's also important is a couple of the other things that really are conducive to a multifamily project. There's a swim club, which we show on the map here. And then there's the Goddard School, which is a daycare that's just north. So just jump into a little bit more detailed photograph of the facility or the proposed lot. You can see it's actually, talk about infill, right? This is the epitome of an infill lot. It's really the only thing not developed in the very nearby. And so what we've looked at here is the facility, the PUD manual in this lot was originally designed for all uses in the I, IB, and IC zoning, industrial, business, industrial, commercial. So just for a way of reference, what that means is this lane, or this roadway here, Double R Boulevard, adjacent to the property is actually 6 lanes divided roadway. To the south is a 4-lane divided roadway on Double Diamond Parkway. There's a full traffic signal already to the south. And that exists today. And then, of course, Technology Drive, where my office has been or was for probably 15 years, right at this location, right at that location. Technology Drive is a 3-lane roadway, so 1 lane in both ways, or 1 lane in both directions, and I think the technical term is a suicide lane in the center. So the facilities, in terms of traffic, are adequate adjacent to the site. I might note also, and I think not to steal any planning thunder, and hopefully they'll clean up what I've left out here, but the proposed use of multifamily as opposed to what's zoned there now will actually be a decrease in peak traffic counts. Not by much, but still a decrease in both the AM and PM. The other items to note is the sewer pipe. That's something that an engineer gets really excited about. There's a 30-inch sewer pipe in Double R Boulevard. An apartment project or a rezone in this location would probably require a 6 or an 8-inch pipe. So we're talking about infrastructure is adequately sized for this type of change, both in traffic and sewer and water. And I think that's an important criteria for entertaining something like this. If I were on the Planning Commission, those are things I'd like to know. The only other thing I could probably point out is from a traffic standpoint, this project will generate over $1.2 million in funds for RTC for improvements to be used anywhere in the region. So it occurred to me today or tonight before I got up to speak to you was this is one of those projects that doesn't require any specific improvements because of its use, because the corner is built out, the lanes are there. So this 1.2 million will really go into the fund to go fix something that's nearby, if you will, something that's on RTC's list already. I don't think you often get that added bonus. Most projects come in and the RTC fees go to fix exactly what the impact is, maybe right next door. And in a situation like this, that 1.2 million will really be spent in the South Benefit District. The only other item I think I'll bring up, because it has come up in letters after the neighborhood meeting, but not at the neighborhood meeting, was something about in the way of schools. And as we know, that multifamily is really housing type and use that this community desperately needs. You're more aware of it than most people probably in town. Schools are an issue. They have been an issue. We're fortunate at this location that 2 of the new projects out of the 4 that are planned and underway are actually being built in this region. So the Damani Ranch School and the Butler Ranch Middle School. So it's just dumb luck, I think, I would say, but that this project actually next to 2 of the projects that are actually being constructed. In addition to that, and planning will also probably echo this, is the school district, obviously, on all these projects are consulted prior to us getting up here, and the schools in the area have capacity for the project. That being said, and considering the time of night, even though we're probably not going to watch the game anyway, considering the score, I'll leave that to any questions and then let staff speak, and I'd be happy to answer any questions after.
Thank you, Vince. Jeff, 4th time tonight. Welcome back.
I feel like I live up here now. Jeff Borkhardt, Associate Planner for the record. So the proposed project is a request for an amendment to the South Meadows 3 PUD handbook. And it's a fairly simple amendment. Essentially, it would add as an alternative to Planning Unit J, which encompasses this whole entire area up in this area. It would allow for multifamily residential as an alternative use to what would normally be allowed in the industrial business, and industrial commercial. So they could potentially still go forward and build what would be allowed in the I, IB, or IC. Or they could build multifamily residential at a dwelling unit or at a density of 30 dwelling units per acre. That would yield approximately 450 units on the site if it were maxed out. Now, once you start adding in parking and landscaping requirements and things like that, and in addition to the fact that there is a wetland along the southern portion of the site, you'll probably see far less than that. But the analysis in terms of the impacts was calculated at maximum development scenario 450 multifamily units. With that, Vince mentioned the schools. 2 of the schools are under capacity. Damani Ranch is over capacity. If you count their portable classrooms, they have sufficient capacity. And with the expansion that's currently under construction, they will have sufficient capacity for the schools. As Vince mentioned, there is sufficient infrastructure surrounding the site. And an interesting aspect of the South Meadows 3 PUD is that they already have a cap in terms of number of overall trips that can be generated in the entire plan unit development. So as part of the building permit for this project, they would have to submit a traffic study that shows that they're not increasing beyond that point. So in addition to getting the regional road impact fees that can be used throughout the region, there's already a cap in terms of what they can do in terms of traffic in the area. So some highlights in terms of the requirements. Essentially, let's see if I can get my pen over here. This multifamily portion has a number of different design requirements throughout the handbook. This portion will essentially mimic those standards, except at a density not 21 dwelling units per acre, which is what this was permitted at, but at 30 dwelling units per acre. And so they'll essentially match that up to the point where garages will be required along the edges. By changing this, also, there will be some additional use restrictions to the surrounding properties. From all the business licenses that I can find and from the adjacent property owners that I've spoken with, there's not going to be any issues with changing this zoning and creating any nonconformities surrounding the site. The Neighborhood Advisory Board and members of the public that attended the Neighborhood Advisory Board were concerned with potential for hazardous materials in the adjacent drug enforcement building here and the U.S. Department of Agriculture building there. The applicant reached out to the DEA and spoke with the agent in charge of the building and said they do not carry any hazardous materials at that facility. And I've confirmed the U.S. Department of Agriculture facility does not carry any hazardous materials in quantities that would be of any concern. They're very, very small quantities. So with that, none of the occupancies that would be of a conflict are located in the surrounding facilities. So there are a number of other small changes throughout the PUD that staff has requested as a cleanup. This would be, I believe, the 17th amendment to this Planning and Development Handbook. And over time, it has been amended here and there, and it's lost some consistency between the two. And so as part of this, staff has taken the opportunity to amend some maps that have been scanned and copied and rescanned and copied. So that's part of this proposal. In addition to that, there was a provision in the airport that was out of compliance with today's standards in terms of the noise overlay and the flight path overlay. And so we've made sure that that now is in compliance with today's standards and what the airport wants. And so that staff is recommending approval, and I'm available for any questions should you guys have any. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Give that man a drink. Some water. Okay, so before I open it up for public comment, I'll bring it back for disclosures. Commissioner Hawkins, start with you.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site.
Commissioner Johnson, as did I.
No disclosures. Commissioner Marshall.
Commissioner Olivas, I visited the site and spoke with the applicant's representative.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to open public comment on this item. Michelle, do we have any request to speak forms on this?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a public comment on this item? No problem. Just state your name, and then when you're done, if you can fill out a form with Michelle.
I will, thank you. I'm Jerry Martin, and I live in Triana North, which is directly north of the proposed community. As you can see, it's right here. There's only one way in and one way out. And I don't know if any of you visited that community during traffic time. Those 6 lanes are like 395 east. It's incredibly busy. What you don't see here is that that's actually, you're ascending from the south, going north, and from the north, you're also doing the same thing. You're going, as you go south, you're ascending up to the top of a hill. We're actually sitting on top of a hill. So and I apologize, I did not plan to speak. My neighbor was coming. She called me and said, I'm not coming, I'm sick. So she's left me in charge. So I'm not as prepared as she would be. But my biggest concern is the traffic that flows on Double R. I'm not opposed to building. My husband was a builder. I sell real estate. So trust me, I understand your needs. I think it's important for multifamily. We just need to know how they're going to have ingress, egress on the side streets or onto Double R. And what's that going to impact Double R for us? So thank you, and I will fill that form.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Anyone else? If not, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for questions. Who would like to start us off? Commissioner Hawkins?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple questions for Vince, if you would.
Yes, sir.
Could you point out to me, please, and the rest of the commission on the ingress and egress areas of this proposed subdivision?
Yeah, I'll point out to you what we think will probably happen. But the reason that you don't see a site plan here is because it's a zone change and not really a site plan review, if you will. What we're proposing right now, though, would be a right in, right out only, because the PUD precludes any kind of left turn on Double R. That was actually written in by Bob Gottsacker back in the day, if you remember him. So what we'll propose there is a right in, right out at that location, and then another access point onto Technology Drive.
And where technology comes in, that's signaled right now?
No, sir. In fact, technology is not a full movement intersection. So it's right in and right out also. So some would come and say, well, we actually need full curb cut. We want a signal. We want. It just doesn't make sense. And this goes back to my comment about this was planning 101 back in 1993. They foresaw all of this development happening. They dictated where we could put curb cuts, where they couldn't be. So we're not proposing to change that at all. And then I also go back to what we originally designed for. This could certainly be a warehouse distribution center like across the street to the west, an IGT. I find that highly unlikely these days because of the price of the land. But I find a multifamily a much superior use, less impact than a bunch of 18-wheelers, right? Or even a fraction of those. And it's not impossible to believe that, on Sandhill Drive, they just built those warehouse distribution projects. And although they're probably not a heavy use like a distribution facility, they still have the 18-wheelers. So I hope that clarifies or gives you a little bit more background on what we're thinking.
Yes, I've got two more questions. Are you satisfied with what the DEA told you or your?
I am. I'd have to say that staff, as usual, does a good job. And in fact, we're really concerned about adjacent uses. So I talked to them personally. I didn't know how I'd get a hold of them, but actually they're in the Yellow Pages or on Google. And I gave them a call and talked to the actual agent in charge after a couple getting pushed around a little bit to different departments. But his comment was flat out that if the DEA wanted that land, they would have bought it. And of course, you can expect a DEA agent's pretty not gruff, but he was direct. So he had no problem with the project proposed.
You feel comfortable with them telling you that there's no hazardous material inside that building? That's a good-sized building there.
Very good-sized building. Here's what I'd say is if it was a warehouse distribution building owned by XYZ LLC, and they said, oh, no, we don't do that, or a chrome plater, or even a repair facility, I'd be a little nervous. But the federal government, if anything, is a pretty good rule follower, right? And so the city keeps good records. So do I personally feel comfortable? Absolutely. That if there were going to do something in that building that required special fire or hazardous waste requirements, they would fess up to that. They don't seem like the group of people that would hide something like that.
One last question, or maybe you can answer this. Every time we look at a project, they're always talking about credits, RTC giving you credits. Are you going to derive any benefit or credits from not having to do any roadway improvements?
No, that was my point or my comment before, was it's the exact opposite. We won't really have a need to go build anything that RTC needs, so we won't be able to get an offset from what we have to pay. So this project is one of those, again, well-planned projects. We're going to pay into a fund, and that money's going to go to fix something that someone didn't think about 10 years ago.
Thanks.
Hopefully South Meadows Parkway.
Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Marshall.
For Jeff?
Yeah.
Cynthia Albright, NAB 2. Comment on, and I don't like you to explain this to me because I don't quite honestly get it, but upon tentative map submittal, please do not continue existing landform pattern of sidewalk back of curb. Ensure landscape planting back of curb to separate driving lanes from pedestrians. Do you know what she means?
I'm not sure because no tentative map approval would be required for a multifamily project. In addition to that, the sidewalk's already installed on this site.
I think Vince might have the...
I just happened to be at the NAB meeting, and I do know Cynthia. And I think that got put in the wrong packet. That was for the folks before us because the comment was the sidewalk was up against the curb, and Cynthia had asked, and others in the neighborhood asked to have a meandering sidewalk with a little landscaping between the curb and the project. And I made the joke that this project actually has that exact thing.
Okay,
But I think it was just it's just in the wrong project.
ask a question? I'm sorry, Commissioner
I'm
Marshall?
finished.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Johnson. Jeff, question for you. Maybe this is more a general item for me. The comment with respect to traffic, I understand where that's coming from. My office is actually on the downhill side of Double R, so I can either leave my office at 5 or I can leave my office at 5:30. I cannot leave anywhere in between. However, that traffic flow is going almost exclusively right onto McCarran and all the way around to Points North. I believe, and maybe this is a general planning commission, where in the back end of this area is the southeast connector planned to land with respect to the overall plan here? It's over to I know it's to the east of this.
Yeah, Janelle Thomas for the record. The southeast connector is actually over the ridge to the east. It goes through Hidden Valley.
Right.
And then it ties into South Meadows Parkway at Veterans.
Okay, that was
Yeah.
so the reason I asked that question, and this is looking at traffic, because if you follow the traffic pattern, a lot of the traffic that's coming out of here is going to I-80 and Sparks. So the issues on Double R in the long run are going to be reduced. My second question, though, and this goes back to the comment about the traffic, if we look at this as a residential multifamily project, what is the peak travel time for that? Does it coincide with the 8 a.m. and the 5 a.m. traffic period, or are we looking at?
Yeah, that morning peak would coincide with the normal traffic peak for the apartment site, and unless Vince, it coincides, right?
3 people, 3 engineers, and
Yeah.
a planner, right?
There'd
There'd
be
be
a
a
questions
small
from an
offset.
architect,
So
so
here's
you
what
know
I've
you're in
noticed. Twofold, 2 answers to the question. One is when the Tower Pyramid link does get opened, this project will benefit from that. And yes, there'll be some spill out or removal of traffic that's now currently going north-south on Double R, right? So it'll go down temporarily, and then as development happens in this area, you'd probably see it come back up to levels of today. But you're right on point there, that will take some of that traffic coming off of Double R. In addition to that, though, this Double Diamond Parkway does go around the loop, ties into South Meadows ties in too. And so what you're gonna see here is a little bit different traffic pattern, a little bit spreading out of that traffic. And then the last point is, although obviously from the peaks are gonna be very close, but you're gonna find people going from a multifamily to their office, they're gonna leave a little bit earlier. So you're gonna be talking about a 20-minute lag there. I don't know if it's enough to make a special paragraph in a traffic report, but we all know that if you're trying to get into one of your offices, and mine was on Double R for years, in the red roof buildings there, the professional center, we all know that if you're trying to get into there, somebody leaves their office or their house a little earlier than they arrive at the office. So you're gonna see a little bit of a difference.
So then, using that same comparison, going back to the current planned use for that area, the typical peak times for the industrial use do not necessarily coincide because it's more of a truck traffic, daytime, 8 to 5 occupancy. Just going off
It'll
of some of the reports that we've been seeing are demonstrating a different time between multifamily and in industrial use.
Yeah, Janelle Thomas for the record again. So what you'll find is the logistics within those warehouse distribution centers is probably a little bit different depending on what their operations are and where they're transporting to. They may actually deploy at 7. I'm not really sure what their operations plans look like, but typically you're going to see a peak generally of of commuters getting to the office and getting to those warehouse distribution centers at about the same range of time. Anywhere between 7 and 9 in the morning is typically, where you're going to see that morning peak, and then you're going to see from 4 to 6, somewhere in there for the evening peak.
And then last question, and I'll let either Janelle or Vince field this one. Due to the points of access that you pointed out, the right in, right out only on Double R, and then the access off of Technology Drive, is there the ability to either to basically look at the U-turn potential that's going to happen for southbound traffic on Double R to U-turn and go in? Right now, there's no sign for it either allowing or precluding it, but there are a number of large trucks that do make that turn, not as a U-turn, but are in that turn lane. And I guess my concern would be U-turn traffic as opposed to going down and looping around on Technology to come in the longer way.
Right. So I think, we'll be asking for an analysis as their project comes in, and those final determinations as to where those access points are allowed will be examined at that time. But yeah, I believe that there's a fair number of U-turns that occur at that signalized intersection today. I know when my children were younger, we went to Silver Bear and we flipped a U there and went around Technology. And so I do believe that practice is still occurring. There is that dedicated right turn lane off of westbound Double Diamond onto Double R. And so traffic has to yield to make sure that they don't interfere with each other.
And I recognize this is a zoning issue. We're not looking at a project yet, but that was just, we recognize as a part of this zoning that the access points are limited to this no matter how it's set up. And if it stays under its current zoning, I doubt that there'd be many large vehicles attempting to make that U-turn. But that's obviously not the case when you're looking at personal vehicles. So,
right.
Okay, I think that answers that question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, and just as I'll make one more comment regarding the Southeast Connector, is that staff is anticipating that there will be some scalping of cars off of the surface roads in this general vicinity to utilize that. And we're anticipating that we'll see some fairly significant changes once that roadway does open. So it may provide some opportunities for some relief.
So you're saying I might be able to leave my office at 5:20 instead of 5:30?
Yeah, maybe so.
Okay.
Yes.
That's really,
A benefit.
it's personal at this point.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you, Janelle. No, it's that's deals with the Southeast Connector, not with this project. Okay, any additional questions or discussion? Or a motion? I'm open to any of the above.
I'll make a motion for LDC 18-00016. Based upon compliance with applicable findings, I move to recommend that the City Council approve the amendment to the design guidelines subject condition A as written below.
Okay, and that motion works, okay. So, do I have a second?
Commissioner Olivas, I'll second that.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 4-0. Good luck with at the council. Okay. Moving on in our agenda, our next item is the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report. Mr. Hawkins, is that you?
Yeah, it was discussed 2 weeks ago in our last meeting, what took place there.
Okay.
So there's nothing new to report.
Thank you. Item 8, staff announcements. Claudia.
Okay, we'll start with 5-1, bottom of the ninth.
Thank you.
Two outs from Michelle. Okay, so the Fire Creek Master Plan Amendment was approved by City Council at the last meeting. There was a discussion on rolling back the sphere of influence in the south part of town. Some of you might not even know it's in our sphere of influence, down at Southtown Drive and Rhodes Road. That application is being reviewed by regional planning, and they're asking for comments from the city. City council said that they have an interest in establishing a joint plan down in that area. So those comments that wish will go to regional planning for consideration when they consider the rolling back of the sphere. The CBS appeal, that was appealed by the applicant regarding their sign condition. If you remember, you limited the sign to 12 feet, I believe. Jeff, is that correct? 12 feet. They were asking for what was allowed by code, and city council overturned that sign condition and is allowing what the height that is allowed by code, which is 25 in that location. That vote, I believe, was 5-2.
Could you give us kind of your sense of, I mean, I thought we had a unanimous vote on that, right?
Yes, you did.
Where does the city council get off? No, I mean, what was the thinking?
The discussion on that, sure.
Yeah, just a little more flavor of.
So as I mentioned, it was a 5-2 vote. Some council members felt that if it's allowed by code, then they should be allowed to build to that height, and didn't really take into consideration as part of their vote that the height of the existing signs in the area. There was another comment that, word this carefully, that there's vacant land, there are buildings in the immediate area that aren't the highest of quality. There's the vacant building to the south, and they felt that the shorter monument sign wasn't necessary because we don't have a higher standard of development in that area. The two that voted against the motion felt that it was important to start the motion to have better signage, more appropriate signage in the neighborhood. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, great. And then there was a good discussion on accessory dwelling units. I had mentioned last meeting that I'd be bringing that forward. City Council was very excited to bring this forward and start the discussion on accessory dwelling units, ADUs. They have requested a workshop as well as bringing this to the NAB for feedback, and we are going to be looking for quite a bit of input on this, as I know you all know that we need the additional housing and affordable housing, as Commissioner Marshall mentioned a couple cases earlier tonight. This will provide that opportunity, but it can, if not done properly and monitored carefully, it can wreak some havoc in a neighborhood. So we will be looking at this very carefully and how we move forward. We are looking at doing a more technical workshop in December with architects, planners, and kind of that more technical aspect of it, looking at the design and density issues on this. And then we'll be going to the neighborhood advisory boards in January. And then depending on the feedback from there, we may have an additional community workshop to bring all of those comments together and receive additional input. We hope to bring an ordinance to you I'm looking at probably March to get the ordinance to you, but we'll have a series of meetings before that you're welcome to attend any of those outreach components. I think that's all I have. Final score 5-1.
Okay, well, congratulations to all those non-Dodgers fans out there. Item number 9, Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items. Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner, what I'd like to talk about would be, last meeting we talked about effluent, and we were told during the meeting that they were going to do a study or a report. I'd like an update every time we meet on the effluent that's out there at the Reno Stead sewer plant that goes into Swan Lake. Because as we build, Swan Lake's gonna get more and more effluent, and until they, solve that problem, it's gonna be a problem. And so they talked about giving us a report or an update or a study on the effluent that's currently going in versus what might go in at a later time.
I'm going to ask Janelle to come up just to clarify, because she'll be the one providing that information. So I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what you're actually looking for and if we can provide that information.
Yeah, Janelle Thomas for the record. Are you inquiring about the study that's being done or that's being pursued on Lemon Lake that is relative to the infiltration rates and things like that?
Yeah, I remember talking with Mr. Flansburgh at one time a couple years ago that we have I don't know if it's a verbal contract or an agreement, that we have to feed Swan Lake 2 million gallons of effluent a day. If that's the case, we probably are meeting that. Don't know if we're exceeding it, but with all the development that's going on in the North Valleys and that being a closed basin and that sewer plant does all the treatment there, the effluent has only one place to go, and that's in Swan Lake.
Okay.
My question would be, if we're meeting our obligation on whatever gallons was agreed upon for Swan Lake for the bird habitats or whatever,
Okay.
what are we gonna do to mitigate the effluent from all these homes that are gonna come online in the next year?
Okay.
I-
I think I understand where you're headed. So you want to know what the current effluent discharge is to Swan Lake and what the anticipated effluent discharge to Swan Lake is in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
If I could piggyback on that, I had on my list basically kind of a larger agenda item on North Valley flood issues. As an.
Are you looking for an update
Not
from
just-
Washoe County and City of Reno Public Works departments as a whole?
Well, I don't know. I'd like.
Because I think they're working together on that issue.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I can.
hearing a lot of comments about it, and I think it'd be useful for me to have a greater context to put some of those comments in and.
Yeah,
see
so
those.
I'll reach out to John Flansburgh, our Public Works Director, to inquire about the effluent discharge to Swan Lake, and then if he has some updates regarding his coordination with the Community Services Department at Washoe County, and that's going to be Dwayne Smith, who's in charge of that aspect of it. Because I believe that the two departments and the two agencies are working conjunctively to get that issue understood.
So to my mind, it's kind of more of also not just, but like capacity, land use issue that just some
It
greater
is.
context of.
Well, and
your
what I will
project-
share with you is that the Public Works Department here is in the process of developing a request for proposals for a consultant to go out and investigate the infiltration rates in Swan Lake and to develop strategies for the future, for future development. And that may be related to square footage of roofs that are generated through development, and if there's any suggested mitigation for that, volumetric mitigation, possibly. And we don't know what the results of that will be, but it could be something like a regional flood area or something like that.
Thank you. Additional suggestions, those two are great.
Is there a way we can get an update on, they've got several huge pumps out there in the North Valleys, one at Silver Lake and the other one's on Swan Lake. Are we as taxpayers paying for those huge pumps to sit there because they're not running? We're talking about 8 and 10-inch pipe coming in and out of those pumps. Somebody's paying for those pumps, and we have, at one time, we had 7 or 8 over by Silver Lake, and we had 3 or 4 right there at Swan Lake.
We'll make sure that gets included in the update.
Okay.
Okay. Item 10, public comment. For public comment on any action item or for any general public comment, I have a request here from Danny Cleus. Danny, welcome back. I say that to everybody that comes up more than once.
Well, Danny Cleus for the record. As you can see, it's just not North Valley's complaining about traffic. It's Verdi, it's South Reno. Everybody's complaining about it. Something has to be done. We need more studies, and not from developers, not from people that developers do. We need somebody independently to do it. As the develop here for the one in South Reno, the ladies that were sitting over here were sitting there shaking their heads and giggling. We drive that stuff every day. These guys can't pull the wool over our eyes. An independent study that the developer's not paying, I'd be glad to pay it if I had the money. As a taxpayer, I think it should already be done by the city of Reno, Washoe County, state of Nevada. The effluent, you guys were asking about that. In the next couple of years, they're supposed to up it to $7 million or 7 million gallons a day that I have read. That's ridiculous. It started out to be 400 and I believe it was 95 acre feet in the dry seasons. Now it's going into the millions every day. There's a problem. Every wet winter we get, it's going to do the same thing over again. And as everybody knows, it's not rocket scientists, the filtration system of that lake is basically nil. Just looking at my the pumpers reports, it goes clay, sand, clay, sand, clay, sand for 250 feet. So you could just expect that lake to be the same. Next thing I have is a pipeline from Fish Springs that's supposed to be doing the water for all these new buildings, for all your new subdivisions. Well, I just read it was allotted 8,000 acre feet of water per dry season for Lemon Valley. It didn't say anything about expansion to other places. That's for the dry season. All these houses that you guys are going to do, it's going to use all that water. Then what happens? 8,000 acre feet of water will do 4,000 homes for 1 year. You already have 5,000 going to, whatchamacallit out there in Cold Springs. Where's all these warehouses and stuff going to get their water? That's all I got to say. Something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Danny. Any additional public comment? See none, I will close that and bring it back to the commission for adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Olivas, a motion.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night.
Aye. Good night.